Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Bewitched Theater, an Honoring Audiobooks original story. From the Reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D. Chapter 1, The Phantom in the Footlights. It was on a damp and mist-laden evening in early November that I found myself once again walking the familiar cobbled streets of London, the gas lamps flickering against the rising fog like faint beacons of some long-forgotten age. The city, shrouded in shadow and mystery, seemed peculiarly alive, as if waiting with bated breath for the night's peculiar events to unfold. I was bound for the Criterion Theater, an establishment both venerable and ostentatious, nestled within the heart of the West End, where an unusual commission awaited my companion, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Our relationship, as my readers well know, was founded on a mixture of friendship, admiration, and a shared passion for the unraveling of mysteries. Yet this evening promised a departure from the common cases of burglary or murder. Instead, we were invited into the very heart of the theatrical world, a place as rife with secrets and shadows as any London alleyway. Holmes had received a letter the previous day, penned with an elegance and urgency that immediately piqued his interest. It was from one Mr. Archibald Worthington, a figure of some repute within the theatrical community, though I confess my knowledge of such circles was limited. Dear Mr. Holmes, the letter read, I implore your assistance regarding a most disturbing event that has transpired at the Criterion Theater. The final performance of our new play, The Crimson Mask, was marred by tragedy. A leading actor was found dead under mysterious circumstances backstage. Rumors of a ghostly apparition have spread among the cast and crew, and the production's reputation lies in ruin. Your presence would be invaluable to uncover the truth. Holmes' eyes had gleamed with a familiar spark when he handed me the letter. Watson, the stage is set for a curious tale indeed. There is much to be gleaned from the world of performance, where appearances deceive and passion runs as hot as the footlights. I could scarcely contain my curiosity as we made our way toward the theater, the hum of London's nightlife swirling around us like the breath of some restless spirit. Upon entering the Criterion, I was immediately struck by the heady melange of excitement and apprehension that pervaded the air. The vast auditorium was a cavern of shadows and light, the polished wood of the balconies gleaming under the flicker of the gaslights. The scent of fresh paint, grease paint, and old velvet mingled with the faintest hint of tobacco smoke. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was palpably tense. Actors flitted about like restless phantoms, rehearsing lines with nervous energy or exchanging hushed whispers. The stagehands moved with deliberate efficiency, their faces drawn and pale. Mr. Worthington, a tall, gaunt man with a sharp nose and eyes that seemed perpetually wary, greeted us with a mixture of relief and desperation. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, your arrival is most timely, he said, his voice low and hurried. The death of Edward Mallory has cast a pall over us all. He was a man of talent and secrets. There are those who believe the theater itself is cursed. Holmes smiled faintly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Superstition seldom explains what reason cannot. Tell me everything from the beginning, Worthington. Worthington led us to a small anteroom adjacent to the stage, where the principal cast had gathered in somber assembly. It was here that the details of that ill-fated night came forth in a torrent. Edward Mallory, the leading man, was found dead just moments before the final curtain of The Crimson Mask. The official verdict was accidental, an untimely fall down the backstage stairs, yet whispers of a spectral figure haunting the corridors stirred unease among the company. Miss Beatrice Langley, the young ingenue and Mallory's frequent co-star, spoke in trembling tones. We all saw something, a shadow, or perhaps a figure, just before the accident. It moved like a ghost, gliding silently across the wings. None dared approach. A grizzled stagehand, Thomas Higgins, grunted in disbelief. Ghosts be damned. I say someone wanted Mallory out of the way, and fast. That man had more enemies than friends. Holmes listened intently, his sharp gaze flickering between each witness. Were there any threats? Disputes? Rivalries that might explain such hostility? Worthington hesitated. Mallory was a complicated man. Charismatic, yes, but also prone to making dangerous enemies. There are rumors he blackmailed a wealthy patron, a man whose influence could destroy careers. As the evening progressed, Holmes insisted I accompany him to watch a rehearsal of The Crimson Mask, keen to observe the play itself and the interactions of its players. The stage was a labyrinth of crimson drapes and shadowed alcoves, with intricate set pieces evoking a Gothic mansion. The cast performed their roles with a fevered intensity that betrayed undercurrents of tension. Holmes's eyes never left the actors, noting the smallest gestures, a clenched fist, a forced smile, a lingering glance. "Observe, Watson," he whispered. "The director, Mr. Julian Archer, commands attention but carries an air of restrained fury. His dealings with Mallory were known to be fraught. There is more to this tragedy than mere accident or spectral visitation." I felt a chill as the stage lights flickered briefly, casting elongated shadows that seemed to twist and writhe as if alive. The theater itself appeared to breathe, a living entity cloaked in secrets. Back in the green room, Holmes's scrutiny deepened. He examined a small scrap of paper found clenched in Mallory's hand, an unsigned note bearing a single cryptic sentence: "The mask must fall before the final act." "An ominous warning, Watson," Holmes mused. "One that suggests premeditation and deceit." He also discovered faint traces of a rare poison on the back of Mallory's costume, subtle enough to evade casual notice but unmistakable to one with Holmes' expertise. Poison and staged accident. The pieces are aligning. Determined to uncover the truth, Holmes sought an audience with Julian Archer, the director. In Archer's dimly lit office, walls adorned with playbills and accolades, the tension was thick. Archer, a man with sharp features and eyes like storm clouds, met Holmes's piercing gaze without flinching. "Mr. Holmes, if you seek scandal, you will find it. But know this, Edward Mallory's flaws were his own making." Holmes smiled thinly. "Flaws that bred enemies, Mr. Archer? Tell me, did you have cause to silence Mr. Mallory?" Archer's expression darkened, but he said only, "The theater is a cruel mistress. I mourn the loss of the play, not the man." As I retired that night to our lodgings on Baker Street, the theater's mysteries gnawed at my thoughts. Holmes, ever the enigma, had withdrawn into his study, eyes gleaming with the fires of deduction. "There is a shadow behind this curtain, Watson," he said softly, "and it is woven from jealousy, revenge, and the desperation of men who play with fire." I resolved to accompany him further down this dark path, for the curtain was yet to rise on the final act of this bewildering drama. The night deepened as the gaslights outside flickered through the fog, casting long shadows upon the walls of our rooms at Baker Street. Holmes sat by the window, his long fingers steepled, a faint glimmer of thought playing in his eyes. I, meanwhile, found little rest. The theater's mysteries haunted my mind like a restless ghost. The image of Edward Mallory's lifeless form, the whispered rumors of spectral figures, and that enigmatic note all combined into a riddle whose solution seemed elusive. Holmes broke the silence at length. "Watson, the theater is an exceptional microcosm of human passions and duplicities. Here, every mask conceals a truth, every performance a subterfuge. Mallory's death is no accident, wow, and these ghost stories are the smokescreen to hide a far more sinister design." I poured us both a cup of steaming tea, grateful for the simple warmth amidst the night's chill. "What then do you make of the note? The mask must fall before the final act." Holmes traced the rim of his cup thoughtfully. "A phrase laden with double meaning. The mask may refer to the literal masks worn upon the stage or the metaphorical masks people wear in society. The demand that it fall hints at unveiling secrets, perhaps the exposing of some blackmail or scandal." I nodded slowly. "The letter was unsigned, yes? Suggesting the author feared discovery." "Indeed," Holmes replied, "or wished to remain anonymous, using the theater's own language of mystery and disguise to cloak a threat." Over the following days, Holmes devoted himself to careful observation of the theater's daily workings. I accompanied him often, noting how he examined not only the cast's words but their gestures, their silences. The play's director, Julian Archer, presented himself as a man burdened but resolute, his passion for the production shadowed by a palpable bitterness. Holmes found Archer's precise mannerisms telling, the quick glances over his shoulder, the terse replies when pressed on Mallory's conduct. Holmes's suspicions deepened as he uncovered whispers among the stagehands. A fleeting comment here about Mallory's reckless affairs, a hushed remark there about his financial entanglements. One evening, a young dresser confided to me, away from prying ears, that Mallory had been seen arguing fiercely with a man known only as the Patron, a figure feared for his influence over the theater's fortunes. The plot thickened further when Holmes discovered that the rare poison found on Mallory's costume was not common, but traceable, a substance only obtainable by those with access to the most exclusive circles. Holmes's inquiries led us to a discreet apothecary in Soho who recognized the description and hinted that the poison had recently been requested by a gentleman fitting Archer's description. Despite the mounting evidence, confrontation with Archer yielded only veiled threats and cold reticence. It was clear the director was guarding something dangerous, and his veneer of grief thinly masked a man prepared to do anything to protect his secret. One evening, after a late rehearsal, Holmes and I lingered in the shadows of the auditorium. The stage, dimly lit by a solitary gas lamp, seemed almost alive, its heavy curtains swaying gently as if breathing. Holmes approached the wings where Mallory's dressing room lay sealed. There, hidden beneath the floorboards, we discovered a small, leather-bound diary. Its pages were filled with frantic scribbles, entries detailing Mallory's growing paranoia, his growing fear of exposure, and references to the patron's threats. The diary spoke of blackmail and betrayal, of a secret that, if revealed, would shatter reputations and ruin lives. As I read aloud the final entry, a shiver ran through me. Tonight, the mask will fall. But at what cost? If I disappear, let it be known the shadows played their part. Holmes looked up sharply, the familiar gleam of triumph flashing in his eyes. We are close, Watson. The game's final act approaches. Now we must watch closely who dares to pull the strings behind the scenes. Days later, at the next performance, Holmes insisted I sit among the audience. We observed the players with intense scrutiny. The manner in which Archer directed, the cast's interactions, the subtle tensions rippling beneath the surface. At the play's climactic moment, when Mallory's character was to meet his dramatic end, the stage lights flickered and a shadow darted behind the curtains. The audience gasped, but no one else seemed to notice the brief apparition. Holmes leaned toward me. The ghost, if indeed it exists, is a fabricated illusion, a cunning distraction to mask something far more earthly and sinister. Returning backstage after the performance, Holmes's investigation accelerated. He cornered a prop master who, after much persuasion, admitted to assisting Archer in producing the ghostly figure using cleverly arranged lighting and hidden mechanisms. Armed with this confession, Holmes prepared to confront Archer one final time. In the director's office, the tension was palpable. Archer's composure cracked as Holmes revealed the evidence: the blackmail, the poison, the staged ghost. His face twisted with rage and despair as he admitted his motives. A man driven to madness by the ruin Mallory had threatened to bring upon his career and reputation. The theater, once a sanctuary for art and dreams, had become a battleground for revenge and deception. As Archer was taken away by the authorities, the weight of the evening lifted. The curse was broken, not by ghosts or curses, but by human frailty and folly. In the weeks that followed, the Criterion Theater slowly healed, its stage once more filled with light and life, though the memory of that dreadful night lingered like a cautionary tale. Holmes, as ever, returned to his quiet study, his thoughts turning already to the next mystery that lurked just beyond the veil of London's fog. Chapter 2. Shadows Behind the Curtain. The morning after the arrest of Julian Archer, the atmosphere in London was electric with gossip and speculation. The newspapers, eager to satiate the public's appetite for scandal, ran headlines rife with insinuations of theatrical curses, hidden affairs, and poisonings. Yet beneath the sensationalism, a deeper story simmered, one that Holmes and I had only begun to unravel. The Criterion Theater, once vibrant with the excitement of performance, had been shuttered pending an inquiry. The usual hum of activity was replaced by a somber quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of wooden beams or the distant echo of footsteps in the deserted corridors. It was in this heavy stillness that Holmes and I returned to investigate more closely, driven by his insatiable curiosity and the gnawing feeling that the director's confession was but a piece in a larger puzzle. Holmes's eyes glittered with determination as we crossed the threshold. Watson, the theater is a living organism, its pulse faint yet discernible even in silence. We must listen closely to its whispers. I followed him through the labyrinth of corridors, the air thick with the scent of dust, rosin, and aged velvet. Our footsteps echoed softly, magnifying the sense of isolation. We paused before the door to the dressing rooms, the very heart of the player's world, and Holmes produced a small toolkit, his fingers deftly working the lock. Inside, the cramped space was a tangle of costumes, wigs, and props, each telling a story of artistry and illusion. Yet what caught Holmes's attention was a narrow gap beneath the wall paneling near Mallory's former dressing room. With practiced ease, he pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment. Within lay a collection of letters, hastily folded and bearing the seals of several prominent figures in London's high society. Holmes sifted through them carefully. "Blackmail indeed," he murmured. Mallory was no mere actor, but a man who knew the power of secrets. The letters detailed threats, veiled warnings, and demands for silence, a litany of manipulation that implicated influential patrons who had much to lose should their indiscretions come to light. Suddenly, Holmes's expression darkened. "Watson, note this. Many of these letters reference a phantom mask society, an exclusive circle rumored to operate beneath the veneer of London's elite." I frowned, unfamiliar with the term. A secret society? But to what end? "Power, control, and the maintenance of reputations," Holmes replied grimly. Mallory was leveraging their secrets, using the theater as his stage for blackmail, but in doing so, he played a dangerous game. Our search continued with renewed vigor. Holmes's sharp eyes caught a faint smudge on a velvet costume, a trace of a rare chemical reagent. Consulting his pocket microscope, he identified it as a residue consistent with theatrical smoke mixtures, but with an unusual additive that could cause disorientation or faintness. The ghost was not simply a shadow, Holmes observed. It was enhanced with chemical trickery designed to unsettle and confuse. As we pieced together these clues, a figure approached from the shadows, Miss Beatrice Langley, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began hesitantly, "there is something you must know. Edward had confided in me before his death. He spoke of meetings in secret rooms beneath the theater, places no one was meant to find. He feared he was being watched." Holmes inclined his head. "Secret rooms, you say? Lead the way." Beatrice guided us through a hidden door concealed behind a tapestry in the rear of the stage. Beyond lay a narrow spiral staircase descending into darkness. We descended cautiously, the musty air thick with the scent of damp stone and neglect. At the bottom, we found a chamber, a clandestine lair of sorts, strewn with documents, theatrical masks, and a ledger bearing names and cryptic notes. Holmes's fingers traced the entries with precision. "This, Watson, is the heart of the Phantom Mask's operations, a web of influence spanning the theater and beyond." Hours passed as we cataloged the evidence, the weight of secrecy pressing upon us. It became clear that Mallory's death was only the surface ripple of a far deeper conspiracy, entangling ambition, fear, and vengeance. Later, in the flickering lamplight of Baker Street, Holmes shared his reflections. "This case tests the very essence of human nature. The masks we wear, the shadows we hide in, and the lengths to which some will go to protect their secrets." I nodded, aware that we were treading a path fraught with peril. The theater, that grand stage of illusion, had revealed a darker script, one whose final act we had yet to witness. The following morning, after a brief but restless night, Holmes and I set out for a second visit to the Criterion Theater. The morning fog still clung to the streets of London as we arrived, the usual bustle of city life somewhat subdued by the eerie silence surrounding the building. The great marquee, once bright with the promise of spectacle, hung dull and deserted, its letters faded and some torn from the wind. Holmes paused on the steps, his gaze sweeping the edifice before us. "Watson, the theater is a repository not only of art, but of human folly and ambition. Every nail, every beam, and every shadow tells a story. We must listen to those stories if we are to unravel the truth." As we entered, a thin shaft of morning light pierced the gloom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. The scent of old wood, mingled with the faint tang of grease paint and mustiness, enveloped us. It was a place that had known joy and sorrow in equal measure, and now, tragedy. Our first destination was the manager's office, a cramped room cluttered with playbills, scripts, and the detritus of production. Here, we hope to speak with Mr. Frederick Anson, the theater's business manager, a man reputed for his meticulous records and strict temperament. Anson received us with wary eyes, his face pale from the shock of recent events. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted us with a thin smile. "I trust you are here to continue your investigation?" Holmes inclined his head. "Indeed, Mr. Anson, we seek any information that might shed light on the motives and circumstances surrounding Mr. Mallory's untimely demise." Anson nodded and motioned to a pile of ledgers resting on his desk. Mallory was a man of many secrets, I'm afraid. His behavior in recent weeks had become erratic. There were rumors, whispers, really, of debts, threats, and quarrels with several influential patrons. I asked, "Did he confide in you about these threats or debts?" The manager shook his head. No, he was a private man in that regard. But there was an incident only days before his final performance. A visitor came to the theater late one evening, a man known to us only as Mr. Gray. He had an air of authority and menace, and the meeting with Mallory was brief but intense. Holmes leaned forward, fingers tapping on the wood. "This Mr. Gray, is there any record of his identity?" Anson hesitated. "No official record, I'm afraid. He came unannounced and left the same way. Some speculate he is connected to the so-called Phantom Mask Society you mentioned." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "The society appears to be more than mere rumor." Our conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. A young woman entered, her eyes bright but troubled. None other than Miss Beatrice Langley, the actress who had previously spoken to us. "Mr. Holmes, Mr. Watson," she began, "I believe I have found something that might help. I was going through Mallory's effects yesterday and discovered a small, sealed envelope hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his dressing room." She handed over the envelope carefully. Holmes examined it, noting the seal, a crimson wax stamp bearing a fleur-de-lis. "Open it, Holmes," I urged, curiosity piqued. Inside was a letter, written in a hurried hand. "If you read this, it means I have fallen victim to the shadows. Trust no one but the truth. The Phantom Mask holds more than secrets. It holds power. Beware the serpent in the garden." Holmes's eyes gleamed. The metaphor of the serpent, a symbol of deceit and betrayal. Beatrice looked distressed. "I wish I could help more. Edward was a friend, and I fear his death was only the beginning." Holmes assured her gently, "Fear not, Miss Langley. We shall uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried." The afternoon saw us visiting various members of the theater's company, actors, stagehands, and technicians, each providing fragments of the larger picture. A chorus girl spoke of overheard conversations, a stage carpenter mentioned strange deliveries at odd hours, and the costumier recalled a peculiar request for costumes bearing no production affiliation. The pattern that emerged was one of secrecy and deception, a tangled web spun around Mallory's blackmail scheme. Holmes's acute mind connected these disparate threads with the precision of a master weaver. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread out his notes and sketches. The Phantom Mask is not merely a shadowy group, but an institution wielding influence through fear and manipulation. Mallory's role was both that of victim and villain, using the theater as a cloak for his machinations. I asked, "But what of the ghostly apparitions? The specters witnessed by so many?" Holmes smiled thinly. "A theatrical trick of smoke, mirrors, and chemicals to unsettle and distract. But who controls the stage fright but the puppeteer? The ghost was a mask for murder, a smokescreen for a far darker reality." As we delved deeper, Holmes devised a plan to catch the perpetrator. A performance was scheduled for the following week, the same play during which Mallory had died. Holmes intended to observe closely to catch any unusual behavior or signs of sabotage. The days leading up to the performance were fraught with tension. Whispers of curses and curses filled the corridors, and some cast members spoke openly of fear. Holmes remained unshaken, his keen mind focused like a blade. The night of the performance arrived with a chill fog settling over London. The theater filled with eager patrons, the air thick with anticipation and unease. I took my seat beside Holmes, whose eyes never wavered from the stage. As the play unfolded, the familiar scenes took on a new weight. Every gesture, every glance between actors seemed charged with hidden meaning. Then, at the moment the ghost had appeared before, a shadow flickered behind the curtain, but this time Holmes was prepared. With a slight nod from him, I followed as he slipped backstage during the intermission. There, we found the prop master, a pale and nervous man named Collins, fumbling with a device rigged to cast eerie lights and release a thin veil of smoke. "Caught in the act, Collins," Holmes said quietly. "Your ghostly theatrics have been unveiled." Collins broke down, confessing to helping the director stage the supernatural effects. He revealed how Archer had used these tricks to frighten Mallory, intending to scare him into silence. Yet Holmes was not satisfied. This confession explains only part of the mystery. The poison, the blackmail, the secret society, there is a greater hand at play. The final act awaited, and with it, the resolution to a tangled tale of ambition, deceit, and revenge. Thus the curtain fell on the second act. The theater seemed to hold its breath, the audience enraptured but uneasy. Holmes's gaze was sharp, darting between the faces of the cast and crew, his mind sifting through possibilities as swiftly as a river in flood. "Watson," he whispered, as the house lights dimmed for the next scene. "Note the subtle tension between the players. Observe how Archer's eyes linger on certain individuals, and how their hands tremble ever so slightly. The stage is alive not only with drama, but with concealed truths." I watched closely, my senses heightened by the weight of the unfolding mystery. Among the ensemble, a man stood apart, Mr. Reginald Pike, the actor who had replaced Mallory's role after the tragedy. His demeanor was cool and measured, but Holmes's scrutiny suggested a hidden unrest. After the final act, as applause thundered through the hall, Holmes motioned for me to remain seated while he slipped backstage once more. Moments later, I saw him emerge with Miss Langley in tow. They spoke in hushed tones before joining me, their faces grave. "Watson," Holmes began, "we have reason to believe that Pike is more than an actor. His arrival was too sudden, his appointment too convenient. He may be connected to the Phantom Mask or to Archer's sinister designs." Beatrice added, "There are whispers that Pike has a shadowy past, one marked by secrecy and whispered threats." Our next steps were clear. We needed to learn more about Pike's history. Holmes and I arranged a discreet meeting at a modest cafe in Covent Garden, where the clatter of teacups and murmurs of patrons masked our inquiries. Holmes, ever the master of subtlety, engaged Pike in conversation, probing gently but persistently. Pike responded with practiced ease, but there was an edge to his words, a slight hesitation when pressed on certain topics. After Pike left, Holmes turned to me. "There is much to uncover, but his evasion betrays guilt or fear. Our quarry is close, Watson." Meanwhile, I took the opportunity to speak with Beatrice. Her loyalty to Mallory and growing anxiety were evident. Edward confided that he had uncovered something dangerous, a secret meeting of the Phantom Mask beneath the city. He feared exposure and believed his life was at risk. Holmes nodded. The secret society's influence runs deep, extending beyond the theater to the highest echelons of society. It is no surprise they would go to such lengths to silence a threat. That evening, Holmes and I returned to Baker Street to examine the ledger found in the secret chamber. The pages were filled with names, dates, and coded annotations, a ledger of debts, favors, and dark dealings. Holmes's fingers traced a particular entry. J.A., paid in full, 10th April, handled. J.A. could only mean one person, Julian Archer. Handled, Holmes mused, a chilling euphemism. It suggests more than mere financial transactions. Determined to decode the ledger, Holmes employed his knowledge of ciphers and symbolism. Hours passed as he meticulously deciphered entries that revealed the extent of the Phantom Mask's control over theaters, businesses, and political figures. It was a network built on fear and manipulation, using blackmail and intimidation to maintain power. Holmes paused as he uncovered a notation referencing a final performance scheduled for the night of Mallory's death, hinting at a planned crescendo to the society's schemes. "The pieces fall into place, Watson," Holmes said quietly. "Mallory's murder was the opening act in a grander design. The theater is but a stage for a deadly game of power." The next morning, Holmes and I ventured to the offices of a renowned antiquarian, Mr. Harold Finch, who had been recommended as a specialist in secret societies and historical records. Finch greeted us warmly, but with a cautious demeanor. "I have heard whispers of the Phantom Mask," he admitted, "a society steeped in secrecy and legend, dating back centuries. Their influence waxes and wanes but never fully disappears. He handed us a leather-bound volume chronicling the society's history, a labyrinth of intrigue involving masked balls, clandestine meetings, and shadowy patrons. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he studied the pages. This knowledge may prove invaluable. The society's rituals and symbols could provide us the key to identifying their members. Our research led us back to the theater that very evening. The fog had thickened, curling around the building like a spectral cloak. Holmes's plan was simple yet daring. Attend the new performance undercover, observe the players closely, and attempt to unmask those involved with the phantom mask. Disguised as ordinary patrons, Holmes and I took our seats. The audience was a curious mix of London's elite and theatrical devotees. The tension was palpable. As the play progressed, Holmes's keen gaze caught a subtle exchange between Archer and a masked figure seated in the shadows of the balcony, an exchange of a folded paper and a barely perceptible nod. During the intermission, Holmes slipped away to investigate. I followed discreetly, observing as he approached the balcony where the masked figure sat alone. The figure's posture was tense, fingers clutching the paper tightly. Holmes cleared his throat gently. "Might I have a word, sir?" The figure turned, revealing the sharp, calculating eyes of Lord Edmund Hargrave, a patron known for his influence and secrecy. "Mr. Holmes," Lord Hargrave said smoothly, "to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Holmes's voice was low but firm. "I am here to uncover the truth behind recent events at the Criterion. Your presence here, and your involvement in the society known as the Phantom Mask, is of great interest." Lord Hargrave's expression hardened. "You tread on dangerous ground, Mr. Holmes. The theater is a place of art, not politics. I advise caution." Holmes met his gaze unwaveringly. "Caution is a luxury we can ill afford. The mask must fall, and the truth revealed." The exchange was tense but inconclusive. Holmes and I withdrew, our minds racing with new questions and dangers. As the final act concluded without incident, the audience erupted into applause, masking the storm brewing behind the scenes. Back at Baker Street, Holmes pieced together the clues with relentless determination. The web of deceit was vast, stretching from the stage to the highest seats of power. The Phantom Mask was not just a society of artists, but a cabal of manipulators, using the theater and its players as pawns in a deadly game. Holmes's gaze fixed on me with grim resolve. "Watson, the final act is near. We must be vigilant. The greatest danger lies not on the stage, but in the shadows behind the curtain." Chapter 3. The Mask of Shadows. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the dense London fog as I made my way down Baker Street, my thoughts still heavy with the events of the previous evening. Holmes had been uncharacteristically restless, his mind clearly consumed by the tangled threads of the Phantom Mask and the mysterious forces at play behind the scenes of the Criterion Theater. The revelation that the affair might involve espionage and political treachery elevated the stakes far beyond a mere murder or theatrical scandal. As I entered our shared lodgings at 221B, Holmes was already seated by the window, a pile of letters and documents spread before him. His keen eyes scanned a report with intense concentration. On the table rested a freshly brewed cup of tea, steam curling upward like the tendrils of suspicion that wrapped themselves around our case. "Ah, Watson," Holmes greeted me without looking up. "Just in time. We have much to discuss and little time in which to do it." I settled into my chair, eager for the latest developments. "What have you uncovered in the night's work?" Holmes tapped a particular document. A coded message intercepted from one of the Society's clandestine correspondences. It refers cryptically to the final curtain and the serpent strike. It is clear that the Phantom Mask's involvement in espionage is not idle gossip but a chilling reality. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "And what of Captain Sterling? Has he brought any useful information?" "Indeed. We are to meet him later this afternoon at a discreet location where we can confer without the risk of eavesdroppers. His naval intelligence might shed light on the identity of the traitors among the mask." The clock was ticking, and time was a luxury we did not possess. Holmes's methodical mind had already set our course for the day, to uncover who among the theater's patrons and players wielded influence not just over art, but over secrets that could topple governments. Our walk to the rendezvous was through the still, hazy streets of London, the usual clamor of vendors and carriages muffled by the morning mist. As we approached the appointed meeting place, a quiet club frequented by men of influence, I observed Holmes's countenance, set and unwavering. Inside, we found Captain Sterling awaiting us, his naval uniform pristine, his expression grim. "Gentlemen," he began without preamble, "the situation is dire. The Phantom Mask has infiltrated not only the Criterion Theater, but several government offices. They employ codes, theatrical performances as cover, and influential patrons to mask their operations." Holmes leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Tell us of this infiltration. Who among the Society's members are suspected?" Sterling produced a list, which Holmes scrutinized closely. There are several names: Lord Edmund Hargrave, whom we have met, Julian Archer, the director, Reginald Pike, the actor, and, disturbingly, others whose identities remain unknown. I interjected, "Are these men connected by more than their involvement in the theater?" "Indeed," Sterling replied. "They share common cause in undermining England's interests, though their motives differ. Some seek personal gain, others revenge or power." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "The death of Edward Mallory was no accident, but a deliberate act to silence a man who threatened to expose these machinations." The weight of the revelation settled over us. A play was being staged, not on the boards of the Criterion, but in the shadows of London's power. Our next move was clear: to identify the hidden members of the Phantom Mask, gather evidence, and prevent further tragedy. Sterling suggested a daring plan: infiltrate an upcoming masked ball rumored to be hosted by the Society. Such an event would provide the perfect opportunity to observe the players, eavesdrop on whispered conversations, and perhaps catch the serpent in its lair. Holmes accepted immediately, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "The game, Watson, is truly afoot," he said with that unmistakable spark. Preparations for the ball occupied our hours until nightfall. Holmes procured suitable disguises: an elegant but inconspicuous black mask and evening wear befitting a gentleman of discreet presence. I, too, was outfitted accordingly, though I must confess a certain discomfort at the idea of masquerade, given my more straightforward nature. As we made our way to the grand estate where the ball was to be held, I observed the streets transform from the familiar bustle of London to the hushed, gilded world of aristocracy. The carriage ride was smooth, yet every shadow seemed alive with potential danger. Arriving at the estate, we passed through ornate gates and into a courtyard, where carriages and coaches spilled their human cargo into a swirl of finery and perfume. The guests were masked, their faces hidden, but their eyes gleaming with curiosity and calculation. Inside, the ballroom was a cavernous space awash with candlelight and crystal chandeliers, the air thick with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Servants in livery moved like shadows, and the murmur of conversation was punctuated by bursts of applause and occasional bursts of laughter. Holmes and I melted into the crowd, our senses alert. We exchanged coded glances, our unspoken communication owned by years of partnership. Holmes's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on a tall figure cloaked in crimson, a woman whose eyes burned with fierce intelligence. Beside her stood a man whose posture bespoke command and menace. "Watson," Holmes whispered, "observe that pair. They command attention, and yet seem detached from the revelry. I suspect they are key players." We moved closer, our conversations blending with the music. Holmes engaged a passing nobleman in discussion about recent theatrical productions, using the guise of a theater enthusiast to glean information. Meanwhile, I observed the guests, noting whispered exchanges and furtive glances. Suddenly, Holmes's expression sharpened. "There, the man in the blue mask speaking with Hargrave." I followed his gaze. Lord Hargrave was indeed in animated conversation with a figure whose masked visage was unmistakable once seen close, Reginald Pike. Their conversation was brief, but the words "tonight" and "final act" were audible even to my untrained ear. Holmes inclined his head. "They plan something tonight, Watson. A coup, perhaps, or the final step in their scheme." As the evening wore on, the ball's festive facade began to crack. Whispers of threats, veiled warnings, and promises of silence circulated like poison in the air. At one point, Holmes excused himself to slip away toward the servants' quarters, a known route for secret messages and hidden meetings. I followed discreetly, my heart pounding with anticipation. There, in the dim light, Holmes intercepted a letter passed from one hand to another, a letter bearing the same crimson fleur-de-lis seal we had found before. Holmes unfolded it carefully and scanned the contents. His eyes narrowed. "This letter confirms it, Watson. A plan to eliminate a target at midnight, disguised as part of the performance. The serpent's strike is imminent." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. Holmes folded the letter. "We must act quickly. The lives of many may depend upon our intervention." Returning to the ballroom, Holmes and I moved with purpose, weaving through the throng to locate Captain Sterling, who had also infiltrated the event under the guise of an aide. Together, the three of us devised a plan to prevent the assassination and expose the conspirators. As midnight approached, the guests gathered for the final act of the evening, a mask of shadows and intrigue, a fitting stage for our own unfolding drama. Holmes's voice was a whisper in my ear as the curtain rose. "Prepare yourself, Watson. The truth will soon be unveiled." The grand hall of the estate was transformed into a realm of mystery and illusion, with gilded mirrors reflecting the flickering candlelight and the delicate rustle of silk mingling with hushed whispers. The guests' masked faces created an atmosphere where identity itself was fluid, and deception wore 1,000 guises. It was a perfect stage for the phantom mask's dark designs, and we found ourselves caught in its labyrinthine web. Holmes's keen eyes darted about, missing nothing. He moved with the grace of a seasoned predator, blending seamlessly among the swirling figures, while I, feeling the weight of my unfamiliar disguise, struggled to keep pace. Captain Sterling was equally vigilant, his military training lending him an air of silent authority even amid the frivolity. As the clock neared midnight, the crescendo of the orchestra filled the room, a haunting melody that seemed to echo the tension beneath the surface. The final act was upon us. Holmes leaned toward me, whispering, "Observe carefully, Watson. The serpent's strike will be hidden within this performance. Our quarry will make their move during the mask's climax." The stage was draped in deep velvet, lit by dim sconces that cast long shadows. The actors, themselves masked, performed with an eerie precision that suggested rehearsed duplicity. Suddenly, a figure cloaked in crimson stepped forward, a woman whose presence commanded attention. I recognized her as the mysterious lady Holmes had noticed earlier. Her voice, rich and melodic, carried through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mask of Shadows. Tonight, the truth shall be veiled in darkness, and only the sharpest eyes shall pierce the illusion." The audience responded with polite applause, but Holmes's gaze never wavered from the crimson-cloaked woman. "She is central to this plot, Watson," he murmured. "Watch how the players move around her." Moments later, a sudden commotion erupted near the rear of the hall. A man in a blue mask, the same one Holmes had seen speaking with Lord Hargrave, stumbled forward, clutching his chest. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he collapsed to the floor. Before anyone could react, Holmes was at his side, examining the man with practiced speed. "Poison," he declared grimly. "A slow-acting toxin, designed to kill unseen." Sterling barked orders to secure the exits, while I helped clear the immediate area. The guests' panic was palpable, but the masked woman maintained an eerie calm, her eyes gleaming with something I could not decipher. Holmes turned to her sharply. "You, madam, have knowledge of this act. Your role is not merely theatrical." She smiled, a slow, dangerous curl of the lips. "You presume much, Mr. Holmes. The theater is my domain, and I will defend it fiercely." But Holmes was undeterred. "The theater may be your domain, but tonight it is a battlefield." Suddenly, a hidden panel in the stage's backdrop slid open, revealing a narrow corridor. Holmes's eyes flashed. "There lies the path to our serpent's lair. Come, Watson." We followed him swiftly, navigating the dim passage that smelled of damp stone and aged wood. The muffled sounds of the ball faded behind us, replaced by a sinister silence broken only by the distant drip of water. At the corridor's end, we found a small chamber where several figures conferred in whispers. One wore the unmistakable crimson cloak of the lady, another, the angular mask of a falcon. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces obscured but their intent clear. Holmes's voice was low but sharp. "Gentlemen, the game is over." The conspirators turned, startled, but Holmes was already advancing, a small revolver drawn from his coat. You have gambled with England's security, with innocent lives. It ends now." The Crimson Woman's voice was a hiss. "You do not understand, Holmes. We are reclaiming what is owed to us. The theater is a stage for power, and you are but a pawn." Holmes shook his head. "Not tonight." With swift precision, he subdued the nearest man, while Sterling and I restrained the others. The conspiracy was laid bare before us, and the tangled web of betrayal began to unravel. Yet as we led the captives back to the ballroom, a final revelation awaited. The director, Julian Archer, stepped forward from the shadows, his mask discarded to reveal a face twisted by rage and regret. "You think this ends here?" He spat. "This was but the opening act." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "No, Mr. Archer. Your final curtain is at hand." The guests watched in stunned silence as the truth emerged. The director's bitterness and need for revenge had orchestrated a deadly masquerade, using the phantom mask as both shield and sword. As the authorities arrived to take the conspirators into custody, I caught Holmes's thoughtful gaze. "This is but one thread, Watson. The theater's shadows run deep, and I fear this play has many more acts." Chapter 4. The final act unveiled. The cold grip of dawn had not yet loosened its hold on London when Holmes and I found ourselves once again ensnared in the labyrinthine puzzle of the Criterion Theatre and the Phantom Mask's sinister web. The night's dramatic confrontation had left the city buzzing with rumor, the air thick with a mixture of fear, scandal, and the ever-present scent of smoke from the gas lamps lining the fog-wreathed streets. Holmes, whose restless energy seemed barely diminished by the late hour, sat by the window of our Baker Street lodgings, staring out as the first pale fingers of sunlight struggled through the morning haze. I took my customary seat near the fire, the events of the previous evening weighing heavily on my mind. "Holmes," I began quietly, "the revelation of Archer's involvement has shaken me deeply. To think that the man who shaped the very play we witnessed harbored such bitterness, such malice." Holmes did not respond immediately, his eyes still fixed beyond the window. Finally he spoke, his voice measured but grave. "Mr. Archer's duplicity was the final veil, Watson. Yet as ever, the surface merely conceals deeper currents. The Phantom Mask is but a vessel for darker ambitions. We must unravel the full extent of this conspiracy before the curtain falls on England's honor." I nodded, feeling the enormity of our task pressing upon us. "But how, Holmes?" "The Mask's members are numerous and hidden behind layers of deception." Holmes smiled faintly. "Then we peel back each layer, one by one. We begin with those apprehended last night." The morning sun rose slowly over London, casting a golden glow on the city's bustling streets. Holmes and I accompanied Captain Sterling to the Tower of London, where the prisoners, members of the Phantom Mask, were to be held pending questioning. The ancient stone walls, a stark contrast to the theater's glittering opulence, seemed to echo with the weight of history and justice. The air was damp and chill, lending a somber gravity to the proceedings. Inside the dim interrogation chamber, Holmes stood before the captured conspirators, his gaze sharp and penetrating. The men and women, though masked just hours before, now appeared pale and exposed, their bravado stripped away. Holmes began with a measured tone. "You have been implicated in a scheme to undermine the security of our nation and to murder one of your own. It is your chance to speak truth and lighten your burden." The room remained silent for a moment, tension coiling like a serpent. Then, a man with a harsh scar running down his cheek spoke. "You think we'll betray our cause for a chance at mercy? Foolish." Holmes regarded him thoughtfully. "Not mercy, but justice. The truth has a way of surfacing, whether you aid it or resist it." Slowly, pieces began to fall into place. The group revealed that the Phantom Mask was indeed a front, a gathering of influential men and women united by greed, vengeance, and a desire to manipulate political affairs under the cover of theatrical spectacle. Their leader, the elusive Serpent, had orchestrated not only the poisoning attempt, but the staged death of Edward Mallory to silence his blackmail and prevent exposure of their plans. Holmes listened carefully, cross-examining each witness with relentless precision. The director, Julian Archer, despite his earlier threats, remained resolutely silent, a figure shrouded in mystery. Meanwhile, I took it upon myself to visit the Criterion Theatre during daylight hours. The contrast between the night's eerie shadows and the bright, dusty emptiness of the empty stage was stark. I met with the stage manager, a nervous man named Thomas Blythe, whose eyes darted nervously even in broad daylight. "Mr. Blythe?" I began. "I must know, was there anything unusual in the days leading to the final performance?" He swallowed hard. "There was. Attention, sir! Mr. Mallory received letters, threats, I believe. The director was more severe than ever, and several of the cast seemed unnerved. Did anyone see or hear anything strange backstage?" Thomas hesitated, then whispered, "There were rumors of a ghostly figure, the so-called Bewitched specter, but many dismissed it as nonsense." "Yet the rumors had their effect," I mused. "Fear can be a powerful weapon." Returning to Baker Street, I relayed my findings to Holmes, who was engrossed in mapping connections between the Mask's members and various political figures. "There," he pointed to a carefully drawn diagram, "is the network. The Mask's influence spreads far beyond the Criterion's stage, reaching into Parliament and the highest echelons of society." "Is it not extraordinary," I said, "that a theater troupe could wield such power?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Theater, my dear Watson, is the perfect cover for conspiracy. Illusion masking reality, deception, playing to an audience too distracted to notice the real drama unfolding behind the scenes." Days passed with tireless investigations, secret meetings, and a flurry of coded correspondence. Holmes and Sterling worked closely with Scotland Yard and Naval Intelligence, uncovering documents and intercepting messages that hinted at a larger plan, a coup of influence and sabotage timed to coincide with a parliamentary session critical to national security. One evening, as Holmes examined a series of cryptic telegrams, I sat nearby, noting the growing tension etched into his face. "Holmes," I ventured, "do you believe we can prevent the catastrophe before it unfolds?" He looked up, eyes gleaming with determination. "We must, Watson, for the sake of England and all we hold dear." Our opportunity came swiftly. A confidential tip led us to a secluded warehouse near the Thames, where a meeting of high-ranking conspirators was scheduled. Under the cover of darkness, we approached the location, Sterling and I armed and prepared. Holmes moved with silent confidence, his expression unreadable. Inside, the dim light revealed figures cloaked in shadows, their voices low but urgent. As we stepped forward, Holmes's voice rang out. "Gentlemen and ladies, your performance ends tonight." Surprised murmurs rose, but the conspirators quickly regained their composure, drawing concealed weapons and brandishing threats. A tense standoff ensued, the air crackling with imminent violence. Holmes's mind raced for a solution. With a sudden shout, Sterling lunged forward, disarming one man while I grappled with another. Holmes moved with fluid precision, incapacitating a third with a swift strike. The confrontation was fierce but brief. Reinforcements from Scotland Yard, alerted in advance, burst into the room, securing the conspirators. Back at Baker Street, in the quiet aftermath, Holmes pored over the evidence collected, the intercepted telegrams, the confessions, and the plans uncovered. This conspiracy, Watson, was a play with many actors and many scenes, each designed to confuse and distract. But the truth, like light, pierces through all shadows. I leaned back, exhausted but relieved. And what of Julian Archer? Holmes regarded me thoughtfully. He was the spark, the embittered director whose personal vendetta gave the plot its fire. But the flame was fueled by others, men who sought power under the guise of the phantom mask. As the sun rose on a new day, I reflected on the strange interplay of theater and treachery we had witnessed. The Criterion Theater, once merely a place of entertainment, had become a battleground of secrets and lies. Holmes stood by the window, gazing out over London. The final act is concluded, Watson. Yet, as with all great plays, there is always an encore. We must remain vigilant. The days following the dramatic arrests at the Thames warehouse unfolded with a strange mixture of relief and lingering unease. Though the immediate threat had been quelled, a shadow still hung over the Criterion Theater and the city itself. There was something about the phantom mask's reach, its tendrils winding through the corridors of power, that suggested this was but a prelude to greater troubles. Holmes, never one to rest on laurels, pressed forward with his investigations. Each morning, I found him hunched over letters and maps, his keen mind piecing together the puzzle with relentless focus. One morning, after a particularly long night of study, he turned to me, eyes bright with a new realization. Watson, I believe the true mastermind remains hidden, orchestrating events from behind the curtain. Are you suggesting there is yet another player? I asked. Indeed. The evidence points to someone with both the means and the motive to manipulate the mask's operatives, a figure of considerable influence within Parliament itself. The thought chilled me. A conspiracy reaching into the heart of England's governance was no mere theatrical drama. It was a matter of national security. Our next step was to infiltrate the mask's inner sanctum. Holmes had learned of a secret meeting scheduled in an abandoned chapel on the outskirts of London. Disguised once more in the garb of an aristocrat, and with me by his side, Holmes ventured into the twilight shadows where the conspirators would gather. The chapel, long since desecrated and forgotten, was the perfect venue for clandestine gatherings. Its crumbling pews and broken stained glass lent a ghostly air to the proceedings. Inside, the masked figures whispered urgently, unaware of the eyes watching from the dark. Holmes and I slipped through a side door and concealed ourselves behind a shattered altar. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear the serpent was none other than a prominent member of Parliament, Lord Edwin Blackthorne, a man renowned for his eloquence, but whispered about in the back rooms of Whitehall as a man with dangerous ambitions. Tonight, the final pieces fall into place. Blackthorne's voice slithered through the shadows. With the Parliament distracted, our agents will move to seize control of the naval yards and cripple England's defenses. Holmes's jaw tightened. A coup, he murmured. The phantom mask was merely a mask for political upheaval. Suddenly, a candle flickered, betraying our presence. The conspirators turned, startled, but Holmes stepped forward boldly, his voice calm but commanding. Lord Blackthorne, your ambitions end here. A fierce struggle erupted. The chapel echoed with shouts and the clash of weapons. Yet, with Sterling and a contingent of officers arriving just in time, the conspirators were subdued. Back in the quiet of Baker Street, Holmes laid out the intricate web of plots and counterplots for me. This conspiracy was as much a battle for England's soul as for power, he said. Thanks to our vigilance, the nation's heart beats on. I looked at him, admiration mingled with awe. Holmes, once again, you have pulled back the veil from the darkest of shadows. He smiled faintly. The theater of life is ever fraught with danger, Watson. Our duty is to watch the stage and be ready when the next act begins. Chapter 5. Shadows Behind the Curtain. The morning after the capture of Lord Edwin Blackthorne and the unraveling of the phantom mask's deepest machinations, London's fog seemed thicker than ever, as if the city itself were reluctant to breathe freely after the revelation. Yet, despite the arrests and the foiled coup, a heavy sense of unrest lingered in the air, like the silence before a storm. Holmes and I convened at Baker Street, the familiar comfort of our rooms tempered by the gravity of what lay ahead. The momentous arrest of a parliamentarian, a man whose suave public face masked a venomous desire for power, had sent shockwaves through society. It was clear, however, that Blackthorne was but a piece on a larger chessboard. The question now was, who else remained in the shadows, and what lengths would they go to protect their secrets? Holmes sat behind his cluttered desk, eyes narrowed and voice low. The Phantom Masks network extends far beyond the theatrical realm, Watson. Their agents are embedded in government, military, even the press. Our task is to dismantle this web strand by strand. I nodded, setting my notebook aside. What of Julian Archer, the director? Holmes's expression darkened. He remains elusive. His bitterness and personal vendetta were catalysts, but not the root cause. I suspect he was a pawn, willing perhaps, but not the master player. Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a note, which Holmes took with a frown. An invitation, he muttered, scanning the elegant handwriting. From Lady Evelyn Greville. Lady Evelyn Greville was a name I knew well, an influential patron of the arts, renowned for her salons that gathered London's cultural elite, and a woman with access to secrets many wished to keep hidden. Her invitation bore the weight of urgency and discretion. Holmes's eyes glittered with a mixture of curiosity and determination. We must attend, Watson. If the mask's influence reaches her circle, this may be our chance to uncover the mastermind. We prepared swiftly, donning our finest attire before venturing into the heart of London's West End, where the city's glamour masked the shadows beneath. Lady Greville's residence was a grand townhouse on Grosvenor Square, its facade adorned with ivy and the glow of gas lamps. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the storm brewing beyond. The salon was alive with conversation, the room filled with actors, politicians, artists, and aristocrats, each weaving their own stories into the fabric of the evening. Lady Greville herself was a striking woman, her sharp gaze and poised demeanor commanding attention as she greeted us. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I trust you received my note?" she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Indeed, Lady Greville," Holmes replied. "Your invitation is both welcome and intriguing." She smiled enigmatically. "There is much to discuss. The mask's tendrils reach into this very room." Our attention was drawn immediately to a small group gathered in a corner, whispers barely audible, but laden with tension. Among them was a man I recognized as Sir Reginald Pemberton, a rising figure in the House of Commons, whose recent speeches had stirred controversy. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Sir Reginald," he addressed the man, "your recent statements in Parliament have raised questions. Care to enlighten us?" Pemberton's smile was thin. "Mr. Holmes, I assure you, my interests are aligned with England's prosperity." Holmes's reply was ice cold. "And yet, you were seen at the warehouse by the Thames just before the arrests. Care to explain your presence?" Pemberton faltered for a moment before recovering. "I was there on business, unrelated to any conspiracy." Holmes's eyes glittered with suspicion. "Your business appears entwined with treason. I advise you to reconsider your position." The room tensed, but Lady Greville stepped in smoothly. "Enough, gentlemen. Let us not forget the evening's purpose. We are here to celebrate the arts, not to cast aspersions." Her diplomatic intervention reminded me of the delicate dance that London's upper crust often performed, where alliances shifted like shadows, and truth was the most guarded secret of all. Over the course of the evening, Holmes and I spoke with several guests, carefully extracting information. The pattern that emerged was chilling. The phantom mask was but the visible face of a deeper political cabal, its members united by greed and ambition, willing to sacrifice lives to achieve their aims. In the midst of the gathering, Holmes was approached by a young woman named Clara Voss, an actress recently cast in the Criterion's productions. Her demeanor was nervous but resolute. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, "I believe I have information that could help you. The director, Julian Archer, was not acting alone. There are whispers of secret meetings held at an estate outside London, estate known as Blackwood Hall." Holmes's interest was immediately piqued. "Thank you, Miss Voss. Your courage in coming forward is commendable." Clara nodded, her eyes darting around as if fearing eavesdroppers. "I fear for my safety, but I cannot remain silent." The following day, Holmes, Sterling, and I set out for Blackwood Hall. A sprawling estate shrouded in mist and ancient oaks, nestled deep within the Surrey countryside. The journey was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Upon arrival, the manor appeared abandoned. Windows shuttered, gates chained. Yet, a faint glow from within suggested someone awaited our arrival. Holmes motioned for caution as we approached, and I could see the muscles tense in Sterling's stance. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with secrecy. We were greeted by a servant who seemed both wary and resigned. "You have guests, my lord," he said, leading us into a dimly lit study. There, seated behind a desk cluttered with documents and maps, was a man whose face was unfamiliar to me, yet bore the commanding presence of a leader. His eyes were cold and calculating. "Mr. Holmes," he said smoothly, "I've been expecting you." The man at the desk looked every inch the master of this shadowed domain. Tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp features softened only slightly by the faintest hint of a sardonic smile. His eyes, however, held a chilling intensity that spoke of power wielded with ruthless precision. Holmes's gaze locked with his without a trace of intimidation. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Holmes," the stranger said smoothly, leaning forward. "I am Benedict Carroway, and you have no idea what game you have stumbled into." Holmes inclined his head slightly, his eyes narrowing with interest. "On the contrary, Mr. Carroway, I am quite aware of the stakes. You stand accused of orchestrating the Phantom Mask and plotting a subversion against Her Majesty's government." Carroway chuckled. low and deliberate. Accusations are merely opinions draped in the cloak of truth, detective. But you are perceptive. I grant you that. He gestured towards the maps and documents spread on the desk. You see, the Criterion Theater was never about mere performance. It was a stage upon which I set my plans for reshaping England's destiny. The mask was a means to an end, a carefully crafted illusion to distract the masses while the real players moved unseen. Holmes's eyes glimmered with a fierce light. And what end might that be? Carraway's smile widened. Power, of course. Yeah, power reclaimed by those who have been marginalized by the current regime, those who know what it truly means to govern. I shifted uneasily. The man exuded charisma, but also something far more dangerous, cold calculation and absolute conviction. Holmes rose, pacing slowly before Carraway's desk. Your scheme was bold, Mr. Carraway, but ultimately flawed. The loyalty of your mask's members was divided. Many acted out of fear or personal ambition, not allegiance. Carraway's eyes darkened. Fear is the currency of power, Holmes. You underestimate how deeply people will sink when offered a taste of influence. Sterling, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. And what of the stage death of Edward Mallory? The blackmail, the poison, the threats. Your handiwork, no doubt. Carraway's expression hardened for a moment, then softened into mock regret. A necessary sacrifice. Mallory was a loose thread that threatened to unravel the entire tapestry. His scandalous behavior made him an inconvenient liability. Holmes's lips curled into a grim smile. Conveniently, you used the theater, the very place of illusion, as your weapon. Yet your truth has been exposed. Carraway's laughter filled the room, dark and echoing. Perhaps. But this is but the opening act, detective. The true drama is yet to come. At that moment, the heavy oak doors burst open, and several men in uniform strode in, flanking Carraway. His eyes met Holmes's once more, silently acknowledging a battle lost, but not yet the war. As they led Carraway away, Holmes turned to me, his mind already racing. Watson, we have uncovered the heart of the conspiracy, but I fear the danger is far from over. The strands of this plot stretch beyond what we can see. Back at Baker Street, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Holmes's study was cluttered with papers, maps, and newly acquired correspondence intercepted from Carraway's estate. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and indecipherable, began to form a sinister image. Carraway's network is vast, Watson, Holmes said, spreading out a map of London's key locations. His reach infiltrates government offices, military installations, and crucially, the press. I glanced over the map, noting the clusters of marked points. If he still commands loyalty among his agents, our capture of him may only delay his plans, Holmes nodded gravely. Precisely. We must identify and neutralize his allies before they can regroup. Our attention turned to the Criterion Theater itself. Holmes was convinced that the theater was not only a cover for political machinations, but also a physical nexus where conspirators communicated and planned under the guise of rehearsals and performances. In the days that followed, Holmes and I returned to the theater multiple times, employing disguises and subterfuge to observe cast and crew alike. The atmosphere backstage was a curious blend of artistic passion and whispered fear. Some actors avoided eye contact. Others seemed resigned, as if trapped in a web they dared not escape. One evening, while hidden behind a heavy curtain near the stage's wings, I overheard a heated exchange between Archer and a man whose voice was unfamiliar. You don't understand, Archer hissed. The plan is on the brink of collapse. Carraway's arrest has unsettled the ranks. The other voice, calm but firm, replied, Then you must act swiftly, Julian. The next performance will be the signal. Everything depends on it. Holmes, lurking nearby, captured every word with an intensity that made my heart pound. What do you make of this? I whispered when we regrouped. Holmes's eyes sparkled. It appears the theater's final performance is no mere show but a covert signal, perhaps the culmination of Carraway's design. We agreed to alert Sterling and the authorities to increase surveillance for the coming days. The theater was now a powder keg, and the slightest spark could ignite a calamity. In the quiet moments of reflection, I often found myself pondering the strange interplay between art and deceit, passion and treason. The Criterion Theater had become a stage not only for performances, but for power plays that threatened to reshape the fate of the nation. Holmes, ever the sentinel, worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of evidence that would lead us to the final confrontation. His resolve was unshakable, and I was honored to stand beside him as we prepared for the climax of this most extraordinary investigation. As the days passed, the tension in London grew almost tangible, much like the heavy fog that often settled over the Thames at dusk. News of Lord Blackthorne's arrest and Benedict Carraway's capture spread quietly among the upper echelons of society, but many whispered in hushed tones, unwilling to confront the full extent of the conspiracy that had nearly toppled the very foundations of government. Meanwhile, the Criterion Theatre thrummed with a nervous energy that seemed to pulse through every floorboard and paint crack. Holmes and I returned often to the theater, mingling with actors and crew under the pretense of enthusiasts eager to witness the unfolding drama. Beneath the footlights and velvet curtains, a different drama simmered, one fraught with danger and deception. One evening, as the autumn chill settled over the city, Holmes and I found ourselves once again in the shadowed recesses of the theater's backstage. The muffled sounds of rehearsals floated through the air, lines delivered with fervor, the scrape of footsteps across the stage. I could feel Holmes's piercing gaze absorbing every detail, from the nervous twitch of a hand to the furtive glances exchanged in corners. "There," Holmes whispered, nodding toward a figure moving stealthily near the dressing rooms. "Miss Clara Voss. She has been our eyes and ears, and I suspect she has more to reveal." I caught up with Clara moments later in the dimly lit green room. She appeared anxious, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched a folded letter. "Miss Voss," I began gently, "what have you learned?" Her voice was low, filled with urgency. "The plan for the final performance is far more than a mere play, Dr. Watson. Julian Archer and his co-conspirators intend to use it as a cover for a political statement, an uprising veiled in theatrical spectacle." Holmes stepped forward, eyes bright. "And this letter?" Clara hesitated, then extended the note. The handwriting was unmistakably Archer's, filled with coded references to the curtain's fall and the audience's final act. Holmes studied the letter closely. The final act will be their signal, a moment when chaos will descend on the city. The next few days blurred into a fevered rhythm of preparation and espionage. Holmes coordinated with Inspector Sterling to discreetly increase patrols around the theater and key government buildings. Meanwhile, I devoted my time to chronicling every detail of the investigation, acutely aware that history itself was unfolding before me. On the night of the final performance, the theater was packed, an eager crowd buzzing with anticipation, unaware that they were about to witness a play whose stakes were far greater than mere entertainment. Holmes and I took our seats near the front, blending seamlessly among the elite patrons who had come to see the production that had become the talk of London. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over the red velvet seats and gilded balconies, while the orchestra's overture swelled in the pit. The curtain rose to reveal a lavishly decorated stage, the sets crafted with exquisite detail. The actors moved with practiced grace, their voices carrying the scripted lines that mask the subterfuge beneath. Suddenly, amidst the unfolding drama, subtle cues began to emerge, gestures and phrases that seemed oddly out of place. Holmes's keen eye caught the flicker of a signal, a dagger held just so, a whispered phrase repeated thrice. I glanced at Holmes, whose expression was taut with concentration. "This is no ordinary play," he murmured. "Watch closely." As the drama unfolded, a series of coded actions followed. Behind the scenes, masked figures slipped quietly into position, their movements choreographed with precision. It was clear the conspirators intended to use the performance as both distraction and cover. Suddenly, in the midst of a climactic scene, the theater lights dimmed unexpectedly, plunging the auditorium into near darkness. A chilling silence fell, broken only by the distant sound of muffled footsteps and hurried whispers. From the shadows of the stage emerged a group of armed men, masked and resolute. The audience gasped, many believing it part of the performance, but Holmes and I recognized the danger instantly. "Sterling!" Holmes whispered sharply. "They've made their move." The inspector, seated a few rows behind us, rose swiftly, barking orders as his men sprang into action. Chaos erupted. The armed intruders surged forward, intent on seizing key members of government and theater personnel who were complicit in the conspiracy. The audience, now fully aware of the threat, scrambled toward the exits, some tripping in panic. Holmes and I moved quickly through the fray, guiding fleeing patrons to safety and engaging the assailants with calculated force. Clara Voss appeared at my side, her face pale but determined. "We must stop them before they reach the private boxes," she urged. "That's where the real targets are." Holmes nodded grimly. "Then we have little time." The theater became a battleground, shouts echoing, the clash of steel ringing out amid the shattered illusions of the stage. Holmes's intellect and my steady hand proved invaluable as we coordinated efforts to subdue the attackers. Amid the melee, I caught sight of Archer, his face twisted with rage and desperation, trying to slip away through a side exit. I pursued him, calling out, but he vanished into the labyrinth of corridors. Holmes, meanwhile, confronted the leader of the armed men, a ruthless figure whose mask concealed a cruel smile. Their duel was a masterful display of skill and wits, ending with the assailant disarmed and restrained. As order was restored, Sterling's men secured the theater, rounding up the conspirators and tending to the wounded. The gravity of the night's events settled over the survivors like a heavy shroud. In the quiet aftermath, Holmes and I gathered with Lady Evelyn Greville, Inspector Sterling, and Clara Voss in the theater's once ornate green room. The walls, once alive with whispered plots and secret meetings, now seemed to hold their breath in solemn witness. Holmes addressed the group, his voice steady. "This night has revealed the depths to which ambition and vengeance can drive men, but it has also shown the courage of those who stand against darkness." Lady Greville nodded, her eyes misted with emotion. "London owes you a debt beyond measure." Clara, still catching her breath, added quietly, "I only hope this is the end of the nightmare." Holmes's gaze was resolute. "The masks may be removed tonight, but the shadows linger. We must remain vigilant." Back at Baker Street, as dawn broke over the city, I reflected on the events that had unfolded, the intricate layers of deception, the perilous dance between truth and illusion. Holmes, ever restless, had already turned his attention to the next mystery. But I knew this case would haunt me for years to come. The theater had been both a battleground and a stage, a place where art and treachery intertwined. And though the curtain had fallen on this act, the story was far from over. Chapter 6: The Whispering Walls. The morning after the chaos at the Criterion Theater dawned with an uncharacteristic stillness. The fog that so often cloaked London in mystery seemed reluctant to lift, hanging low and heavy over Baker Street as though mourning the night's turmoil. I found myself seated at our usual breakfast table, the clatter of cutlery and muted conversation from the street below struggling to penetrate the somber mood. Holmes sat across from me, his slender fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes shadowed with thoughts far beyond the present. His sharp features were etched with the faint traces of exhaustion, yet beneath it all lay that familiar gleam of relentless inquiry. "Watson," he said abruptly, breaking the silence, "last night was but a prelude, a mere glimpse into the vast undercurrent of deceit that runs through this city. The Criterion was a stage not only for performance, but for a war of wills, and the players we have yet to uncover remain hidden behind the very walls we seek to understand." I nodded, stirring my tea absently. "Indeed, Holmes. Yet I cannot help but feel the weight of our failure in not apprehending Julian Archer. His escape leaves the conspiracy's heart beating still." Holmes gave a faint smile, more weary than amused. "No failure, my dear Watson. Merely a delay. Archer's survival is a thread we shall follow until it unravels the entire tapestry. But we must begin with the theater itself." The Criterion Theater stood at the heart of the West End, an architectural marvel whose grand facade masked the labyrinthine passages and hidden chambers beneath. It was here, amidst the echoes of applause and whispered secrets, that Holmes insisted we begin our renewed investigation. As we approached the theater's entrance, the scene was markedly different from the night before. The ornate marquee had been stripped of its usual grandeur. Police guards stood watch while workmen swept away the remnants of shattered glass and scattered props. The heavy curtains that once concealed the stage now hung limp and faded, their grandeur tarnished by tragedy. Inspector Sterling awaited us in the dimly lit lobby, his expression grave but resolute. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, we're relieved you've come so soon." Holmes inclined his head. "What have you uncovered since last night, Inspector?" Sterling gestured toward the grand staircase leading to the upper boxes. "Several members of the theater staff have been questioned. A few have provided useful information, though many remain tight-lipped. We also discovered a hidden passage behind the eastern wall of the stage, a narrow corridor that connects to a series of small rooms, possibly used for secret meetings." I raised an eyebrow. "A hidden passage? In a theater known for its openness and public spectacle?" Sterling shrugged. "Exactly why it escaped notice until now, but it appears to have been recently used." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "Then we shall begin there. Lead the way." The corridor was narrow and cloaked in shadow, its stone walls damp and cold to the touch. Faint traces of dust had been disturbed, footprints marking a hurried passage. I could almost feel the ghosts of clandestine meetings past, whispering from the cold bricks. As we moved deeper into the passage, Holmes's keen gaze scanned every surface, every crack and crevice. His fingers brushed along the walls, searching for hidden mechanisms or concealed compartments. "Observe, Watson," he whispered suddenly, "this indentation in the masonry, too precise to be a natural fault. A secret door, perhaps?" With a quiet click, Holmes pressed a concealed latch, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a cramped chamber filled with stacks of documents, faded photographs, and a battered leather-bound journal. Holmes immediately began sifting through the papers, his fingers deftly flipping through pages stained with time. "This, my friend, may well be the key to unlocking the true extent of Carraway's network." Among the papers, I found letters bearing cryptic references to Project Mask and Operation Phantom. The journal's entries detailed meetings, coded instructions, and ominous plans that confirmed the conspiracy reached far beyond the theater's boards. Holmes paused over a particular entry, his eyes scanning rapidly. "The final performance shall mark the culmination of our efforts. The masquerade will shatter the veil of complacency. The time for revelation and reckoning draws near." Hours passed as we painstakingly cataloged the contents of the secret chamber. Holmes's mind raced ahead, piecing together the clues and weaving a complex web of motives and players. The names of prominent politicians, influential journalists, and shadowy financiers surfaced repeatedly, each tied to the conspiracy like unseen strings pulling from the darkness. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly, "there is something else here. A cipher. The letters and numbers scattered throughout these documents are not random, but form a code. I believe this is how Carraway communicated with his agents." He produced a small notebook and began transcribing symbols, his brow furrowing in concentration. As I assisted, I could not shake a growing unease. The deeper we delved, the more dangerous the knowledge became. It was as if the very walls of the theater were whispering warnings, secrets too perilous to uncover. That evening, back at Baker Street, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Holmes and I pored over the cipher, working late into the night by the glow of the gas lamp. Outside, the city breathed in restless rhythms, unaware of the storm gathering just beneath its surface. Holmes suddenly straightened, a triumphant gleam lighting his eyes. "Watson, I have it!" The cipher is a substitution code designed to be decipherable only with the proper key. He handed me a sheet of paper with the decoded message. "Midnight, Westminster Bridge. The final piece will fall. Prepare the mask for reckoning." My pulse quickened. Westminster Bridge, the heart of London itself, was to be the stage for the next act of this deadly drama. "We must warn Sterling at once," I urged. Holmes nodded. "Indeed, we have but hours to prevent catastrophe." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. We rendezvoused with Sterling and a select team of officers, sharing our findings and planning a covert operation to intercept the conspirators at Westminster Bridge. As night fell, the fog thickened, wrapping the city in an eerie embrace. The river's surface shimmered with reflections of gas lamps and the distant glow of horse-drawn carriages. Holmes, Sterling, and I took our positions beneath the shadow of the bridge, our senses heightened by the chill and the anticipation of confrontation. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a procession of figures emerging from the mist, masked and cloaked in black. They moved with purpose, their voices low and urgent. Holmes's whisper cut through the cold night air. The mask. They are here. The tension was palpable as we watched the conspirators arrange themselves in a semicircle, preparing to enact the final ritual that would send shockwaves through London. Holmes motioned to Sterling. Now. The officers sprang from their hiding places, converging on the masked assembly. Chaos erupted once more. The struggle beneath the gas-lit bridge fierce and desperate. Amidst the scuffle, Holmes and I spotted Archer attempting to flee, his cloak billowing as he darted toward the riverbank. "After him!" Holmes commanded. We pursued through the fog, hearts pounding with the urgency of the chase. Archer's footsteps echoed on the cobblestones as he neared a small boat moored to the shore. Just as he reached for the oars, Holmes tackled him with a force born of sheer determination. The two men grappled fiercely, the cold river water lapping at their boots. "Your game is over, Archer," Holmes said, his voice low and commanding. Archer snarled, eyes wild with desperation. "You think this ends with me? The mask lives on. You've only scratched the surface." Holmes tightened his grip. "No more masks, no more shadows. This city will not be held hostage by your treachery." With Sterling's arrival, Archer was finally subdued and secured. The final piece of the conspiracy had been captured. As dawn broke over the mist-shrouded Thames, Holmes, Sterling, and I stood silently on the riverbank, the weight of the night's events settling over us. Holmes turned to me, a rare softness in his gaze. "Watson, tonight we have not only saved London from chaos, but uncovered the profound depths of human ambition and folly. The Criterion Theatre was but one stage in a much larger play, one whose script is written by those who seek to bend the world to their will." I nodded, weary but resolute. And yet, the truth shines brighter than any mask. Holmes smiled faintly. "Indeed, my friend, indeed." The hours following Archer's capture were a blur of questions, examinations, and urgent conversations. We had taken him to a secure location under Inspector Sterling's supervision, a nondescript room within Scotland Yard, fortified and far from the prying eyes of the press and public. Holmes, Sterling, and I were present as the questioning commenced. Archer, now disheveled and stripped of his former composure, sat chained to a heavy wooden chair, his eyes flickering with equal parts defiance and fatigue. The once proud and charismatic actor-turned-conspirator now seemed diminished, a man caught in the snare of his own machinations. Inspector Sterling began, his voice stern but controlled. "Julian Archer, you stand accused of conspiracy against the Crown, incitement to insurrection, and multiple acts of deception and violence. We expect your full cooperation." Archer's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "Cooperation? I am but a player, Inspector. A pawn in a game far grander than any theater. You may cage me now, but the script is not yet finished." Holmes leaned forward, voice calm but penetrating. "Your mask slips, Archer. Tell us who else is involved. Who are the shadows behind you?" Archer's eyes darted between Holmes and Sterling. For a moment, silence reigned before he finally spoke. "There are others, those who operate from the highest echelons. Powerful men and women whose names you would never suspect. They orchestrate from behind the scenes, puppeteers pulling strings in the dark." Holmes nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Names, Archer? We require names." Archer hesitated, then muttered, "Lord Blackthorne, Lady Marjorie Ashford, and a man known only as the Director." The mention of these names caused a ripple of surprise. Lady Marjorie Ashford was a renowned patron of the arts with considerable influence, and the Director, a mysterious figure, had remained an enigma despite our efforts. "Where can we find this Director?" I asked. Archer's eyes glinted with a twisted amusement. "You won't find him in any public record. He's everywhere and nowhere, a ghost in the machinery of power." The days that followed were marked by fevered activity. Holmes, Sterling, and I pored over every lead, every scrap of evidence. Lady Evelyn Greville, who had remained a steadfast ally, assisted in navigating the social labyrinth that concealed the conspirators. We arranged discreet meetings in London's shadowed parlors and stately homes, gathering intelligence piece by piece. The web grew ever more complex, revealing layers of corruption intertwined with political ambition. One afternoon, Holmes and I found ourselves in a quiet study at Lady Greville's estate, a sanctuary of books and faded portraits. Holmes was deep in thought, fingers tracing the spines of leather-bound volumes. "Watson," he said, "the theater was but a single act in this grand performance. The true danger lies in the networks beyond, the whispers in the corridors of power." He paused, eyes meeting mine. "We must tread carefully. The director will not reveal himself willingly." That evening, we convened at Baker Street to review our plans. Holmes had compiled a list of suspects and potential locations where the director might be found. "Our best chance is the old warehouse district along the Thames," Holmes mused, spreading a map across the table. "A place where shadows congregate and secrets are traded like currency." Sterling nodded in agreement. "It's risky, but it may be the only lead we have." We resolved to investigate under cover of darkness, aware that every step brought us closer to danger. The night air was thick with fog as we navigated the labyrinthine alleys near the river. The scent of salt and coal smoke mingled with the distant clamor of dock workers and the creak of moored ships. Holmes moved with practiced stealth, every sense alert. Suddenly, from the gloom emerged a figure cloaked in black, face obscured beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Hold," Holmes commanded quietly. The figure halted, eyes gleaming with cautious intelligence. "You seek the director?" Holmes inclined his head. "Indeed, and you are?" The man smiled faintly. "Call me Merton. I am but a messenger in this game. The director watches and waits." He extended a folded note, sealed with an unfamiliar insignia. Holmes broke the seal, reading the message aloud. "If you value your lives, cease your pursuit. The mask's final curtain will fall soon, and those who seek the truth may find only ruin." Merton vanished into the mist as swiftly as he had appeared, leaving us with a chilling warning. Back at Baker Street, the note weighed heavily on our minds. Holmes sat by the fire, fingers steepled in contemplation. "Watson," he said, "the director is both bold and cautious. This warning is no idle threat. The game has changed. We must anticipate the final move." I sensed the tension in Holmes's voice, the uncharacteristic tremor of concern beneath his unyielding logic. "Then we prepare," I replied firmly, "for whatever comes next." As dawn approached, I retired to my room, thoughts swirling with questions and unease. The city's pulse had quickened, and I felt as though we were standing on the precipice of something momentous. Suddenly, a soft knock at the door interrupted my reverie. It was Holmes, his face grave. "Watson, come quickly. There's been an incident at the Criterion." We hurried together through the waking city toward the theater. The scene that greeted us was grim. A young stagehand lay unconscious, a hastily scrawled note clutched in his hand. Holmes examined the note closely. It read, "The mask will fall. The final act is imminent. Beware those who watch from the wings." The theater's whispered secrets had grown louder, and the shadows deepened. Chapter 7. The Mask Unveiled. The note clutched in the stagehand's trembling fingers was but a fragment of the enigma that now enveloped the Criterion Theater. A warning whispered from shadowed corners, yet loud enough to send chills coursing down the spine of even the most seasoned investigator. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the unmistakable fire of determination as we stood amid the chaos of the dimly lit backstage area. "Watson," he said, voice low but urgent, "we are close now, closer than ever, to unmasking the architect of this treachery. The mask, this clandestine society, is poised for its final revelation. We must act swiftly and with utmost caution." Inspector Sterling, who had joined us moments before, nodded grimly. "The city holds its breath, Holmes. If this so-called final act unfolds unchecked, the consequences could be dire indeed." The stagehand, barely conscious but willing to speak, provided a crucial piece of information. A meeting scheduled for midnight at the abandoned Greenfield warehouse along the Thames. This shadowed edifice, long forgotten by most, had become the meeting place for the conspirators. The night was thick with fog as Holmes, Sterling, and I made our way toward Greenfield. The river's murmur was a constant backdrop, mingling with the occasional cry of a night bird or the distant clang of a ship's bell. The warehouse loomed ahead, a vast, crumbling relic of London's industrious past, its boarded windows like blind eyes staring into the abyss. Holmes moved like a wraith, senses attuned to every rustle and whisper. "Remember, gentlemen," he murmured, "we enter a den of vipers. The mask's members are cunning and ruthless." We slipped through a side entrance, the heavy door groaning in protest before shutting behind us. Inside, the air was stale, redolent of dust and decay, yet tinged with the faint metallic scent of anticipation. Flickering lanterns cast grotesque shadows on the wooden beams and crates stacked haphazardly. Our footsteps echoed softly as we navigated the cavernous interior. Suddenly, voices, low, urgent, reached us from an upper gallery. Holmes signaled for silence, and we crept closer, peering through the slats of a broken partition. There, gathered in a semicircle, were figures masked and cloaked in black, their faces hidden but their intent clear. At the center stood a commanding figure, tall, poised, exuding a cold charisma. Holmes's eyes narrowed as recognition dawned. "The director," he whispered. "At last." The director spoke, voice resonant and deliberate. "The time has come. The mask will reveal itself, not as a shadow lurking in the darkness, but as the force that shapes the city's destiny. We have endured secrecy and subterfuge, but tonight, the curtain rises." A murmur of assent swept through the gathering. Holmes's gaze flickered to a man beside the director, slender, nervous, clutching a folded document. It was the man who had delivered the cryptic note to us, Merton. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the entrance. Sterling motioned for us to prepare. "The police have arrived," Holmes whispered. "Our presence is known." Chaos ensued. The masked figures scattered, some fleeing into hidden passageways, others attempting to resist. Holmes and Sterling moved with practiced precision, detaining those they could, while I pursued Merton, who darted toward the shadows. "Stop!" I called, but he vanished into the darkness, swallowed by the maze of corridors. The director, however, remained composed. Surrounded and unmasked, he met Holmes's gaze with icy defiance. "You may have won this battle, Holmes," he said, "but the war is far from over." Holmes smiled thinly. "The war ends here, sir. Your masquerade is finished." As the police took the director into custody, Holmes turned to me. "Watson, the pieces are falling into place, but there is still more to uncover. The motive, the deeper grievances, it all lies within the tangled histories of these players." Back at Baker Street, the morning sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across our cluttered sitting room. Over steaming cups of tea, Holmes recounted the night's events and his deductions. The director's identity is not merely that of a disgraced artist, but a man with a personal vendetta against Julian Archer. Years ago, their lives intersected with tragic consequences. Holmes produced a worn leather dossier containing correspondence and newspaper clippings from a decade prior. Archer's scandalous behavior destroyed the director's reputation. His blackmail was a tool, yes, but his true aim was revenge, using the theater as his stage. I absorbed the revelation, the tragic irony stark against the grandeur of the theater and the deadly consequences that had unfolded. Yet, even as justice seemed within reach, Holmes's expression darkened. "Watson, the mask's influence extends beyond these walls. The patrons, the politicians, many have been compromised or coerced. The battle for London's soul is far from over." The weight of his words settled heavily. This case, though momentarily resolved, was but a chapter in a larger saga of power and deception. As I retired that night, the city's lights twinkled like distant stars, masking the shadows that still lurked. And in those shadows, the mask waited. For another act, another masquerade, another secret. The damp fog that clung stubbornly to London's streets seemed to have followed us all the way to the Greenfield warehouse, its murky veils swallowing the gas lamps into pale, ghostly halos. Holmes, Inspector Sterling, and I advanced with deliberate quietude, our boots muffled by the uneven cobblestones and scattered debris of the abandoned docklands. The Thames's low, relentless murmur was a constant reminder of the city's beating heart. Yet here at the water's edge, it whispered secrets few dared to listen to. I stole a glance at Holmes, his sharp profile etched with a grave intensity. His dark eyes were narrowed, every muscle taut, as if his very being was coiled for the confrontation we were about to enter. "This place reeks of abandoned," I murmured, breaking the silence. Holmes nodded. "Abandoned in name only, Watson. Places like these are perfect refuges for clandestine gatherings, away from prying eyes and official scrutiny. The mask would choose a site like this for precisely that reason." Sterling checked the revolver at his side, a grim expression shadowing his face. A fitting stage for this final act, no less. The warehouse itself was a relic of London's industrious past, its once bustling interior now reduced to skeletal wooden beams, broken crates, and discarded barrels mottled with mold and rust. The smell of damp wood and stale sea air filled our nostrils as we stepped cautiously inside, lanterns flickering in the oppressive gloom. Every echo of our footsteps seemed magnified, bouncing off the cavernous walls, the stillness punctuated only by the faint drip of water somewhere unseen. Above us, a narrow mezzanine ran along one side of the building, partially concealed behind tattered canvas curtains and cobwebbed railings. "Voices," Holmes whispered, halting in the shadow of a rotting support beam. "Somewhere on the upper gallery. We must listen carefully." Sterling nodded, motioning for silence as we crept toward a stairwell hidden behind a collapsed wall of crates. Ascending cautiously, we reached the gallery, where dim lanterns revealed a semicircle of cloaked figures gathered in hushed, urgent tones. Holmes's gaze pierced the murk as he identified the centerpiece of this shadowy conclave. Tall and imperious, the man standing at the circle's heart exuded an aura of unyielding command. His voice, when he spoke, carried the cold authority of a master puppeteer. "The hour has come," he declared, his tone resonant and chilling. "For years, we have operated in the shadows, manipulating the threads of influence and power. Tonight, the mask reveals itself, not as a mere cabal of whispers and secrets, but as the sovereign force that will shape the destiny of London and beyond." A low murmur of assent rippled through the assembly, punctuated by nods and the rustle of silk and velvet cloaks. Holmes's voice dropped to a near whisper as he turned to us. "That man, Watson, is the director, the very architect of this tragic mask." My heart quickened as I scanned the other faces, hidden beneath masks that rendered their features unreadable. Among them I caught sight of Merton, the nervous courier whose cryptic warnings had led us here. He seemed ill at ease, clutching a folded parchment like a lifeline. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from the far end of the gallery, a metallic clink followed by hurried footsteps. "Police!" Sterling hissed, drawing his weapon. The room erupted into chaos. The cloaked figures sprang apart like startled birds, scattering into the shadows. Some fled through side passages and broken windows. Others tried to barricade themselves, desperate to hold their ground. Holmes and Sterling moved with lightning precision, seizing those caught in their path. I gave chase to Merton, whose lithe form darted through the twisting corridors with the agility of a hunted animal. "Stop!" I shouted, but he slipped through a narrow alcove, disappearing into the blackened maze beyond. Returning to the center of the fray, I found Holmes confronting the director, who stood tall and unflinching amid the storm of arrests. The mask was gone now, revealing a face etched with lines of cold calculation and bitter resolve. "You thought you could evade justice forever, sir," Holmes said quietly, "but your masquerade ends tonight." The director's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Detective Holmes, ever the thorn in my side, you have uncovered much, yet you grasp only fragments. The mask is not mere villainy. It is the culmination of a vision, a reckoning long overdue." Sterling secured the director's hands with cold steel. "Vision or not, you've orchestrated murder and mayhem. Your reign of terror stops here." The warehouse buzzed with activity as the remaining conspirators were rounded up and the scene secured. Yet Holmes's expression was unreadable, a mixture of triumph and apprehension. "Watson," he said as we stepped into the chill night air, "we have unmasked the figurehead, but the true depth of this conspiracy remains submerged beneath layers of deceit." We walked in silence for a time, the mist curling around our feet like spectral fingers. "At the heart of this," Holmes continued, "is a tale of revenge and ruined lives." The following morning found us once again in the sanctuary of Baker Street. Holmes laid before me a dossier thick with aged papers, letters, newspaper clippings, court records, and personal correspondences, each a fragment of a dark mosaic. He pointed to a faded photograph of a younger man with a resolute jaw and piercing eyes. "That is Henry Caldwell, the man you now know as the director." Holmes's finger traced a line beneath a headline, "Scandal Rocks London Theatre, Julian Archer's Exploits Exposed." Years ago, Caldwell was a rising star in the theater world, a director renowned for his vision and artistry, but Archer's reckless and scandalous behavior destroyed Caldwell's reputation and career. Holmes tapped the paper with emphasis. This vendetta festered until it became an obsession. Caldwell's mask was his stage for revenge, a shadowy theater where the final act would bring ruin upon Archer and all who enabled him. I listened, captivated by the tragic undercurrent beneath the tale of intrigue. What began as artistic rivalry had metamorphosed into something far darker, vengeance wielded with merciless precision. Yet even as the pieces aligned, Holmes's gaze darkened. The mask's influence extends beyond this warehouse and these few conspirators. They have woven themselves into the fabric of London's elite, patrons, politicians, even members of the press. Many are complicit, whether by choice or coercion. He looked out the window, where the city bustled unaware of the battle for its soul. This war is far from over, Watson. Tonight, we celebrate a victory. Tomorrow, we prepare for the next act. That night, as I retired to bed, I found my thoughts wandering to the Criterion Theater, its marbled stage and velvet-draped balconies now forever stained with secrets. The theater had been a crucible where ambition, passion, and revenge had collided in a deadly performance. And though the director was in custody, I could not shake the feeling that this mask of shadows had many more scenes yet to play. London's fog seemed thicker now, more impenetrable. And within it, the mask waited patiently for another curtain call, another dance of deception beneath the gaslit streets. Chapter 8, Shadows Beyond the Footlights. The dawn broke over London with a pale, watery light, as if the city itself was uncertain whether to greet the day or remain shrouded in the lingering mists of night's secrets. At Baker Street, Holmes was already immersed in an ocean of papers, telegrams, and notes, his sharp eyes darting between each fragment with the precision of a hawk tracking prey. "Watson," he said, without looking up as I entered the room. "The affair grows ever more labyrinthine. The director's capture is but a single thread in a tapestry that extends far beyond the Criterion Theater and that desolate warehouse." I settled into my usual chair, rubbing the weariness from my eyes. "I imagine the mask's reach is substantial, given your concerns last night." Holmes inclined his head toward a stack of telegrams. "Indeed, in the hours following the raid, several high-ranking individuals have made discreet inquiries. Parliamentarians, wealthy patrons of the arts, even officials within the Home Office. They seek to contain the scandal before it becomes a wildfire." Our first visit of the day was to Scotland Yard, where Inspector Sterling awaited with grim news and new intelligence. "Holmes, Watson," Sterling greeted us in the musty confines of his office. "We've detained 15 suspects linked to the mask so far, but the list of accomplices grows daily. Several of the arrested have offered information, though much is guarded by silence and fear." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And the identities of these individuals? Are they connected to the theater world alone, or do their tendrils extend further?" Sterling shook his head. "They span a broad spectrum. Financiers, journalists, even minor government clerks. It seems the mask has established a web that ensnares all those who value their secrets, or their silence." The inspector slid a worn ledger across the desk. "Here are the names of those arrested, and a few suspected associates." Holmes examined the list carefully, his keen mind quickly discerning patterns amid the tangled web of names. Notice the recurring addresses and businesses, a number of theaters, private clubs, and shipping enterprises. The mask's influence is embedded deeply in both culture and commerce. Sterling sighed. "And the public remains none the wiser. The press has been cooperative, some might say complicit, in downplaying the story." Holmes's brow furrowed as we left Scotland Yard. The director was merely the visible face of this conspiracy. Beneath him lies a network that manipulates reputations and controls narratives. I asked, "Do you believe the mask's ambitions extend beyond revenge? Could there be a political agenda?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Without question, power, influence, and fear are the currency of secret societies. We must uncover their objectives before their shadow becomes too long." Our next destination was a private club in Pall Mall, one known for its exclusivity and discretion, the kind of establishment where whispers could shape governments. Holmes had secured an invitation through a trusted contact, and we arrived in the late afternoon amid the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of glasses. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of expensive brandy. The walls were lined with portraits of stoic gentlemen, their eyes seeming to watch over the room with eternal judgment. Holmes's sharp gaze scanned the assembly. Watson, observe the subtle exchanges, the barely perceptible nods, the guarded glances. These men and women are masters of concealment. We approached a table where a man with a hawkish nose and steel-gray eyes awaited us, Sir Reginald Pennington, a parliamentarian with a reputation for discretion and influence. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Sir Reginald greeted us warmly, though his eyes held a wary edge. "I trust you find the city in good health despite recent events?" Holmes smiled politely. "Health is often a matter of perspective, Sir Reginald. I come seeking truths hidden beneath the surface." The parliamentarian's expression tightened. "You tread dangerous ground, detective. The mask is no mere theatrical curiosity. It is a leviathan that feeds on secrets." He lowered his voice. "There are whispers of blackmail, political maneuvering, and even financial manipulation. The director's scheme was but a prologue to a grander design." Holmes leaned forward, voice equally hushed. "Do you have evidence, or only conjecture?" Sir Reginald produced a small leather-bound notebook. Names, dates, and transactions, enough to cause scandal and ruin if made public. He handed the book to Holmes, who flipped through its pages with quick fingers. The ledger detailed a series of payments and favors, linking influential figures to a shadowy patron known only as the benefactor. "Who is this benefactor?" I asked. Sir Reginald shrugged. "A ghost. None have seen him, yet all fear his reach." Back at Baker Street that evening, Holmes laid the notebook on the cluttered desk. "This benefactor, he is the puppet master pulling strings from the shadows." I frowned. "But what is his goal? To dominate the theater? Or something more?" Holmes pondered. "Control of information is power, Watson. By owning the whispers, the rumors, the scandals, the mask wields influence over men who hold public office, vast fortunes, and the destinies of nations." He paused, then added, "The theater was the stage for a lesson, a demonstration of what can be done when shadows are manipulated deftly." The days that followed were a whirlwind of interrogations, research, and clandestine meetings. Holmes pursued every lead with his characteristic intensity, piecing together a mosaic of deceit and ambition. One evening, a letter arrived bearing no return address. It contained a single line of warning: "The mask watches all. Trust no one." Holmes smiled grimly. A reminder that our adversaries are aware of our pursuit. This game is far from over. Meanwhile, the Criterion Theater remained a somber monument to tragedy and intrigue. I accompanied Holmes to observe the cast and crew, many of whom were still under the shadow of suspicion. In the dim backstage corridors, I encountered Evelyn Darrow, the ingenue whose delicate features were etched with exhaustion and fear. "Dr. Watson," she greeted me quietly, "I fear we are all trapped in this web. The director's rage has left wounds deeper than any can see." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. There are truths buried in the script of that final performance, truths that some would kill to keep hidden. Holmes's keen observation of the players revealed subtle fractures, jealousies, secrets, alliances forged in shadows. Each conversation was a piece of a complex puzzle, each gesture a clue. He confided to me one night, "The mask thrives on fear and silence. Our task is to illuminate those dark corners, to give voice to the voiceless, and expose the hidden hand." As the investigation deepened, so too did the stakes. Anonymous threats arrived at Baker Street, and late-night visits by unknown figures in the foggy streets became unnerving reminders of the peril that shadowed us. Yet Holmes remained undeterred, his mind a whirlwind of hypotheses and deductions. One particularly stormy evening, as rain lashed the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, Holmes summoned me to the fireplace. "I believe, Watson," he said, eyes glittering, "that the mask's final move will come soon, and it will be a spectacle worthy of the grandest theater." His voice dropped to a whisper. "We must be ready to meet it, whatever form it takes." Thus, the curtain rises on a new act in this dark drama, one where the line between truth and illusion blurs, where the ghosts of the past haunt the ambitions of the present, and where the fate of London itself may hinge upon the unraveling of a tangled mask of shadows. The morning after our visit to Sir Reginald Pennington's club, I found myself restless despite the thick fog pressing against Baker Street's windows. The city felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting for some unseen hand to pull the strings of fate yet again. Holmes, of course, was already at work, his fingers moving rapidly through notes, cross-referencing names, dates, and strange correspondences. "Watson," he said suddenly, holding up a folded sheet of paper, "I have received a curious letter this morning, slipped under our door. Its contents warrant your immediate attention." I took the letter, noting the delicate handwriting and the faint scent of jasmine perfume. "The theater conceals more than tragedy. Seek the lantern's flame where shadows dance longest. Beware those who smile behind masks." Holmes tapped his fingertips together, eyes alight with that characteristic gleam of discovery. An invitation, or a warning, perhaps, but in any case, it beckons us to explore deeper layers of this mystery. Later that day, Holmes and I made our way back to the Criterion Theater. The grand building loomed in the fading afternoon light, its once proud facade now weathered, as if mourning the recent calamities that had unfolded within its walls. The Playhouse's manager, a stout, fidgety man named Alfred Pembroke, greeted us nervously at the stage door. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm relieved to see you again. Since the arrests, the atmosphere here has been unsettling. The cast and crew are still shaken." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "We seek to understand the roots of this unrest, Mr. Pembroke. The ghost stories and spectral sightings. Do you believe they are merely superstition or something more deliberate?" Pembroke's eyes darted around as if fearful of eavesdroppers. "I confess, sir, that many here are terrified. Strange sounds echo backstage after hours, and lights flicker inexplicably. Some swear they've seen the figure of Julian Archer wandering the corridors, though we all know he is gone." I shivered involuntarily. Ghosts or not, the theater seemed a place where the past clung stubbornly to the present. Holmes motioned us inside, and we ascended the grand staircase to the dressing rooms. Here, the air was thick with the scent of powder and sweat, of whispered secrets. "Watson, observe the layout," Holmes murmured. "The director's office here, behind this heavy oak door, and opposite, the actor's quarters, Archer's in particular. His room was the last place he was seen alive." We were joined by Evelyn Darrow, who appeared more composed in the daylight, though the shadows beneath her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. "Mr. Holmes, I have something to show you," she said quietly, pulling a small bundle from within her cloak. "This was found in the wings just before the final performance, letters Julian had hidden away." Holmes unfolded the letters carefully, his eyes scanning rapidly. "Blackmail without question," he muttered. "Here, to Lady Henrietta Mayfair, demanding large sums in return for silence. And these." He pointed to another letter, threats from an unknown hand, warning Julian to cease his demands or face ruin. Our exploration led us next to the cramped prop room, where the faintest echo of footsteps seemed to follow us. Among the dusty crates and forgotten masks, Holmes paused before a peculiar object, a lantern, its glass cracked and smudged. "Note the pattern of soot and the recent wax drippings," he observed. "Someone has been here after hours." Suddenly, a soft noise made us turn. A young stagehand, trembling, stepped forward. I didn't mean to startle you," he stammered, "but I've heard voices in the night, whispers about the mask, about Julian. They say the theater is cursed." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Tell me everything, lad. No detail is too small." The boy swallowed hard, then recounted his sightings of shadowy figures slipping behind curtains and strange symbols painted in hidden corners. Back at Baker Street, Holmes laid out a large map of London, marked with locations connected to the mask: clubs, theaters, private homes. "Each point here," he said, "is a node in their network. We must visit them, draw the threads tighter, and find the puppet master behind this tragic play." Our work took us into smoky backrooms of private clubs where influential men drank brandy and exchanged coded messages, into musty archives where old newspapers revealed whispers of past scandals, and to the homes of disgruntled actors and betrayed lovers who whispered of betrayal and blackmail. Through it all, Holmes's mind was a whirl of deduction. The mask thrives on fear, on secrets that men dare not share. By turning the theater into a stage of terror, they control both the performers and the audience. One evening, as rain lashed the windows and a distant clock told midnight, a sudden knock startled us from our work. On the threshold stood a cloaked figure, Merton, the courier we had briefly detained before, his eyes wide with desperation. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he whispered urgently, There is more to this than you know. The mask's power reaches into places even you cannot imagine. He handed Holmes a tattered manuscript, its pages filled with cryptic annotations and strange symbols. "Study this," he urged, "and beware the next performance. The true act is yet to begin." As Merton vanished into the fog, Holmes turned to me, the weight of the coming storm heavy in his expression. "Watson, we are entwined in a plot more profound and perilous than we first believed. The mask is preparing its next move, and we must be ready to confront it, not merely with reason, but with courage." The city outside seemed to hold its breath once more, the gas lamps flickering against the encroaching darkness, and I knew that the stage was set for a reckoning that would test every skill, every instinct that Holmes and I possessed. Chapter 9. The Final Rehearsal. As the cold breath of autumn deepened over London, the city moved in shadows. A quiet dread seemed to settle over every fog-drenched alley and gaslit square. The Criterion Theatre, though outwardly unchanged, now resembled a crypt more than a house of entertainment. Its boards creaked with whispered rumors and unspoken fears. Within those walls, Holmes and I returned once more, determined to pull the mask from the face of our unseen adversary. It was just past 7 in the evening when we arrived at the theater. The air held the peculiar scent of varnish, grease paint, and secrets long buried. The cast had been called for a final rehearsal before a new production, a hastily rewritten play titled Ashes and Silence, penned by the theater's enigmatic director, Tobias Wren. Wren was a man of few public words and many private whispers. His gaunt features and high collar lent him a priestly air, while his hands, long and pale, were always in motion, shaping the space around him like a composer commanding an unseen orchestra. Holmes watched him with quiet intensity. "Observe, Watson," he murmured as we took seats in the rear of the dimly lit house. "Wren directs not merely a play, but a ritual. Every cue, every gesture is a cipher, and we are here to decode it." The actors moved about the stage like ghosts, rehearsing lines with more fear than conviction. Evelyn Darrow, though radiant under the footlights, betrayed her tension with every darting glance toward the wings. Rupert Ellison fumbled his monologue repeatedly, sweat beading on his brow. There was something unnatural in the air, an unspoken pact of silence and suspicion. Suddenly the lights flickered, and a distant echoing sound, a whistle, a cry, reverberated from the upper catwalks. Wren halted the rehearsal with a sharp gesture. "Enough," he declared. "Take 10 minutes, and clear the stage." Holmes rose instantly and motioned for me to follow. We ascended the narrow stairwell to the upper gantries, where only technicians and phantoms dared linger. From the gloom above, one could see the entirety of the stage, a puppet theater of secrets. Holmes inspected a series of ropes and pulleys. "Look here. Fresh fibers. Someone has tampered with this counterweight. Enough pressure here, and it could send a sandbag plummeting down." He straightened and stared into the darkness. An accident waiting to happen, or a murder waiting to be staged. Below, the cast had returned to their marks, but Evelyn was missing. We descended swiftly. In the maze of back corridors, we found her dressing room door ajar. Holmes entered first, silently. Evelyn sat at her vanity, pale and shivering, a torn letter in her hands. "He's going to do it," she whispered. "Tonight. He said the final scene must be real." Holmes took the letter and scanned it. The handwriting was unmistakable, Julian Archer's, but dated the day before his death. "Watson," Holmes said, eyes alight with deduction, "this letter was not written by a dead man. It was composed to appear as such. Someone is manipulating the ghost story for a final act of revenge." A voice called out from the hallway. Pembroke, the manager. "Holmes! A man has collapsed in the wings." We rushed to the scene. It was Merton, the courier. Blood seeped from a wound at his temple, and he struggled to speak. "The mask, not finished. They meet tonight, the old opera tunnels, beneath the theater." Holmes leaned close. "Who leads them? Who is the director behind the curtain?" Merton choked, gasped, and with a final shudder, fell unconscious. Holmes stood abruptly. "To the tunnels, Watson. The final act begins below." And with that, we plunged into the underworld of the Criterion, lanterns in hand, following the echo of secrets down into the dark. We descended the stairs at a brisk pace, the sound of our boots echoing against the stone, like a second pair of footsteps following close behind. The Criterion's understructure was far more expansive than I had previously imagined. Behind the glamour of its marbled facade and gilt-rimmed balconies lay a web of narrow service corridors, long-forgotten dressing chambers, and a system of tunnels that predated the theater itself, remnants of an older London buried beneath progress and plaster. Holmes held the lantern before him, its golden halo flickering on the damp walls. "These tunnels," he murmured, "were once part of the old opera house that stood here before the Criterion was built. They were sealed off when the foundation was restructured, yet clearly someone has made use of them again." A draft stirred the dust, bringing with it the stale scent of decay and mildew. We passed rusting stage props, shattered footlights, even an abandoned costume rack draped in cobwebbed velvet cloaks that stirred faintly in our passing. "I can scarcely imagine actors venturing down here," I said. "They haven't," Holmes replied. "But the mask has. Mark the footprints, Watson. 3 individuals, perhaps 4. One of them with a slightly turned right foot, a familiar trait." I examined the ground more closely and saw he was right. Impressions in the dust suggested movement not long ago. One of the prints bore the telltale indents of a cane's ferrule, a detail that quickened Holmes's pace. "I know who we will find," he said grimly, "and if I am correct, the final performance is about to begin, without an audience." We came upon an iron gate, partially ajar, the lock snapped as if by brute force. Beyond it, the tunnel opened into a broader vaulted chamber lit dimly by torch sconces. Here, the stones were older and etched with strange markings, some ancient, some newly scrawled in charcoal. In the center of the chamber stood a crude altar made from an overturned plinth, upon which lay a mask of bone-white porcelain. "The mask," Holmes whispered. "This is their sanctum." A soft footfall echoed behind us, and we turned, pistols raised. A figure emerged, not cloaked or hooded, but dressed in the tattered remnants of a stagehand's costume. It was Rupert Ellison. "Holmes," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "I tried to stop them. I didn't know what it would become. They promised influence protection, but Archer, he went too far. And Wren is mad." Holmes stepped forward slowly. "Tell me everything, Ellison. Now, or we all fall into the pit they've dug." Ellison leaned against the wall, trembling. "The mask began as a society for disillusioned actors and patrons. We met in secret, shared grievances, and staged our own performances. Mock trials of those who had wronged us. But Wren turned it into something else. He believed we could remake the theater, purge it of corruption, start anew." "By killing Julian Archer?" I asked. Ellison nodded. "Archer threatened the whole house of cards. He was blackmailing half the city, Wren included. He wanted to expose everything. Wren arranged the accident and used the ghost story to shield himself." "And now?" Holmes asked, his voice like steel. "Tonight's play. It's not just a performance. It's a ritual. Wren intends to kill Evelyn on stage as part of the finale. He believes it will bind the audience to the mask's creed, expose their hypocrisy, and cleanse the theater through shock." We stared at him in horror. "He's mad," Ellison repeated. "Truly mad." Holmes turned on his heel. "Come, Watson. We must return to the surface before the curtain rises." We arrived back in the main hall just as the house lights dimmed. The lobby bustled with wealthy patrons, unaware of the grim purpose behind the night's entertainment. Holmes and I pushed past them, through the aisles and into the wings. From behind the curtains, we watched the opening act unfold. On stage, a tableau of tragic lovers played out beneath shifting spotlights. Evelyn was among them, her expression unreadable. But as Holmes watched her cues, he leaned toward me and whispered, "She knows. She suspects something is wrong." Wren stood at the director's station, lips tight, eyes fixed on the climax that approached. A knife, carefully substituted for a prop, glittered beneath a shawl. Holmes moved like lightning. In a blur of motion, he crossed the stage behind the scenes, seizing the real blade from the tray where it had been hidden. Simultaneously, he signaled to the house manager, who cut the lights mid-scene. Screams erupted as confusion swept the audience. Stagehands stumbled, actors froze. Then a spotlight snapped on, revealing Tobias Wren at center stage, holding Evelyn by the wrist, his face pale with fury. "She was going to ruin it," he bellowed. "She was the last piece." Holmes emerged from the wings. "No, Wren. The last piece was you." In the chaos that followed, Wren was subdued by constables, Holmes had cleverly arranged to be stationed in the crowd, anticipating this very outcome. Evelyn collapsed into a chair, shaking. The audience, thinking it a masterstroke of avant-garde drama, rose to a stunned ovation before anyone could explain the horror that had nearly transpired. Later that night, back at Baker Street, Holmes stood at the window, pipe in hand, staring into the fog that rolled over the Thames. "The theater," he said at last, "is a mirror. It shows us the world as it might be, or as it truly is when stripped of pretense. Tonight, we saw the latter." I nodded. "And the mask?" "Broken," Holmes replied. "Its members scattered, its illusions shattered, but men who hide behind masks will always find new stages upon which to perform." He tapped ash into the tray. "But for now, the curtain has fallen." Chapter 10. Masks Unveiled. The autumn wind howled outside Baker Street like a chorus of long-forgotten spirits, a suitable accompaniment to the silence that hung between Holmes and me in the aftermath of the Criterion affair. The events of the last few days had peeled away not just the layers of deception surrounding Julian Archer's death, but had also torn open old wounds, personal and professional, for many of those involved. The mask had disbanded, its grip over the theater world broken. Yet, a lingering sense of unease remained. As Holmes so often reminded me, evil seldom dies with its first exposure. It retreats, like a fox wounded, only to reemerge where least expected. On this particular morning, I found Holmes poring over a series of telegrams strewn across his desk, each bearing the insignia of a different theater in Europe. He had taken a particular interest in the network of artistic societies that had communicated with Wren, fearing the mask was not merely a local phenomenon, but part of a larger, more insidious movement. "You recall, Watson," he said without looking up, "that Tobias Wren's letters referenced a figure known only as Aurelius, a supposed mentor who first proposed the philosophical tenets of the mask." "I do," I replied, settling into my chair. "You believe he is real?" "I believe," said Holmes, tapping a slender finger against his chin, "that Wren was incapable of crafting such ideas unaided. Aurelius may not be a name, but a title, and if my suspicions hold, he is more than real. He is active." He handed me a telegram from Vienna, wherein a similar accident had claimed the life of a rising playwright. The patterns were distressingly familiar. Mysterious figures backstage, anonymous threats, whispers of a purifying theater. "You think we have not reached the end," I said. "I think," Holmes replied gravely, "that we have only torn back the curtain." Just then, Mrs. Hudson entered bearing a letter, thick parchment sealed with red wax and lacking any external address. It had been left by an unknown courier. Holmes opened it delicately. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing a ciphered message in code. "It's a challenge," Holmes murmured, "from Aurelius himself." He set to work decoding the message at once, his mind alight with the thrill of pursuit. After several minutes, the message revealed its chilling contents. "Come to the place where drama and death once shared a stage. Midnight. Come alone." "The Haymarket Theatre," Holmes said quietly, "where Ellison's career began and nearly ended. It appears our adversary desires one final act." I began to protest accompanying him alone, but Holmes raised a hand. "You shall come, of course. I suspect Aurelius has planned for that." That evening, we made our way across London's narrow streets beneath a moonless sky. The Haymarket loomed before us, closed and silent for years following a tragic fire. Holmes had armed himself discreetly and taken a small satchel containing various tools of his trade, most of which I could not identify. We entered through the side entrance, the door strangely ajar. The interior was charred, its once opulent decor blackened and peeling, though the stage itself remained intact. A single lantern flickered near center stage, casting long theatrical shadows. "You see?" Holmes whispered. "A stage. Always a stage." From the wings a voice spoke. "You are punctual, Mr. Holmes. I feared your curiosity might not outweigh your caution." A figure stepped into the light, tall, draped in a long coat, his face half concealed by a theatrical half-mask painted gold and ivory. "Aurelius," Holmes said simply. "I prefer the mask remain intact," the man replied, his voice smooth and resonant. "I find anonymity liberating." Holmes stepped forward. "You orchestrated the mask across cities, the murders, the manipulations. For what purpose?" Aurelius inclined his head. "Purpose? Transformation. The stage is a sacred temple, Holmes, a place of truth hidden behind illusion. I merely swept away the hypocrisies. You executed actors to prove a philosophy? Holmes demanded. I offered them transcendence. At that moment, Holmes lunged forward, pulling a cord from his coat. There was a crack of movement. Aurelius sidestepped and drew a revolver. No further, detective. This is my monologue. You've had your share of soliloquies, Holmes replied, voice tight. It's time for the curtain. Before the figure could reply, I stepped from the shadows and fired once. The bullet struck the lantern, plunging us into darkness. In the confusion, Holmes tackled Aurelius. The two struggled fiercely in the gloom. I rushed to Holmes's side, but the masked man broke free, disappearing into the recesses of the wings. Holmes lit a match, breath ragged. He's gone. For now. But we saw him, his voice, his height. We can identify. Holmes shook his head. The mask conceals more than his face. It conceals his network, his true role. This was never about one man. We stood there amid ashes and broken boards, two weary men staring into the yawning mouth of a deeper conspiracy. Behind us, the echo of Aurelius's laughter trailed into silence. Watson, Holmes said slowly, London is a theater, and its next play may be its darkest yet. The silence in the ruined theater lingered long after Aurelius's shadow slipped from our view. Holmes stood perfectly still, his silhouette outlined by the flickering flame of a new lantern he had lit from his match. I saw the tension in his frame, not from fear, but from profound irritation. The man hated nothing more than an unresolved thread, and Aurelius had become just that, a loose end dressed in poetry and madness. We climbed slowly to the upper gallery, hoping to catch another glimpse of our quarry. From the private boxes overlooking the stage, Holmes examined the rows of dust-caked seats, each one an empty audience to the ghosts of past tragedies. He leaned over the balustrade, eyes narrowing. He intended to escape, Holmes murmured, but not without leaving us a final clue. I followed his gaze downward. There, nestled where the orchestra pit had once been, now filled with collapsed timbers and rusted instruments, something glinted faintly, a small bronze object. Holmes descended quickly, brushing debris aside until he retrieved it. A pocket-sized lorgnette, the kind a gentleman might use at the opera. He inspected it under the lantern's glow. Engraved initials, he noted. CV. Another player in the mask? Possibly. Or the true identity of Aurelius himself. We must trace it, beginning with known patrons of the Haymarket Theatre and its old subscriber rolls. We exited the Haymarket under cover of darkness, emerging onto a quiet street still slick with rain. A constable Holmes had discreetly arranged met us at the corner and escorted us to a waiting hansom. The city, sleeping under fog and gaslight, seemed unaware of the curtain that had just fallen on another deadly act. Back at Baker Street, I retired briefly to fetch brandy, while Holmes laid out the lorgnette, Wren's Seaford papers, and the Vienna telegram across his desk, like a general reviewing a map before battle. "What troubles you most?" I asked as I poured. "That he wanted us there," Holmes replied. "He wanted to be seen, Watson. This was never just a warning. It was a performance." "You mean to say he's still acting?" Holmes nodded. "He cast himself in the role of antagonist, but he intends to control the stage long after this act is done. A man like Aurelius does not seek applause. He seeks immortality." He fell silent for a moment, his eyes drifting toward the hearth. The fire's glow caught the scarlet lining of his dressing gown, if casting him in eerie light. "We must follow the lorgnette," he said suddenly. "The engraver's mark, Devine, jeweler, Piccadilly, gives us our next scene." The following morning, we paid a visit to Devine's boutique, a narrow establishment with a window full of glittering cufflinks and cigarette cases. The proprietor, a florid man with a monocle, greeted Holmes with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant admiration. "I remember this piece," he said, polishing the lens as he examined the lorgnette. "Commissioned some 6 years past. A gift, I believe, for a Miss Celeste Vallon, a French soprano of some repute, once employed at the Haymarket." "Do you have her address?" Holmes asked. "She retired to the country, but I believe she maintains correspondence with a gentleman in London, a certain Lord Charles Marbury." Holmes stiffened. "You know the name?" I asked. "Lord Marbury is no stranger to scandal," Holmes said tersely. 3 years ago, he was nearly indicted for laundering charitable funds through theatrical investments. The case was quietly suppressed, likely to protect the reputation of those around him. And now he reappears in the orbit of Aurelius, I said. More than that, Watson. I believe he may be our Aurelius. We rode to Marbury House immediately, a Gothic estate brooding on the northern edge of Regent's Park. Marbury was at home, and after some persistence, his butler ushered us into the study. It was a cavernous chamber filled with oil portraits and the scent of pipe tobacco. Lord Marbury entered moments later, tall, silver-haired, with a face carved in self-assured arrogance. He greeted Holmes as one might a particularly intelligent bloodhound. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, motioning to decanters. Holmes wasted no time. "Celeste Vallon, the Haymarket, the Mask. You were involved." Marbury's smile faltered. "I sponsored the arts, Mr. Holmes, not the madness of failed dramatists." Holmes stepped forward and placed the lorgnette on the table. "Then perhaps you'd care to explain this?" Marbury's face changed, just for a heartbeat. A flicker of recognition, quickly masked. "It was a gift," he said, "years ago, to a woman whose disappearance was never explained. She vanished shortly after the Haymarket fire, did she not?" Marbury took a slow sip of brandy. "Celeste was unstable. Many artists are. She left England of her own volition, and I've not heard from her since." Holmes said nothing, merely turned to examine the bookcase. I knew he was buying time, waiting to see if Marbury would reveal anything by omission. He found it soon enough, a faint trail of soot leading from the fireplace to a corner panel in the floorboards. "Hidden flue," he muttered. "Used recently." He knelt and lifted the panel. Inside was a cache of documents, charcoal-sketched set designs, coded letters bearing the same cipher as Wren's correspondence, and one more thing. A script, bound in fine leather, titled The Immolation of the Stage. Holmes rose slowly. "You didn't just sponsor The Mask, Lord Marbury. You authored its manifesto." Marbury's facade cracked, the cold mask of aristocracy slipping into something more primal. "It was meant to purge decadence," he hissed. "To return art to truth. Wren was merely my chorus. I am the playwright." "Then your play has concluded," Holmes replied, "and I believe the next scene belongs to Scotland Yard." As we escorted Marbury into custody later that day, the fog lifted slightly over the city, revealing a reluctant sun. I could not help but feel a weight had passed from London's shoulders. Back at Baker Street that evening, Holmes returned the Mask's final script to his shelf, where it joined a dozen other relics of madness, ambition, and obsession. "You've unmasked Aurelius," I said. "It's done." Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson, I have unmasked one Aurelius. But the role is older than Marbury, and someone else will don the mask again. Perhaps not today, nor tomorrow, but eventually. The theater, like society, always hungers for a villain." He turned back to the window, gazing out at the lamplit city. "But until then," he said softly, "let the house lights rise. Let London breathe." Chapter 11. Shadows upon the Footlights. The waning autumn cast long shadows through the smog-laced avenues of London, but it was not the season that set Holmes on edge. For weeks following the arrest of Lord Charles Marbury, whispers persisted. Rumors of a second circle within the mask, of masked performances in the basements of shuttered theaters, and of actors disappearing without a trace. I found Holmes more restless than usual. His violin, often a tool of thought, now remained silent. Instead, he buried himself in correspondences, scouring obscure periodicals, theater registers, and coded communiques for signs of a deeper thread. Each morning brought new clippings and coded letters, often delivered anonymously. On the 3rd day of November, we received a visitor that roused Holmes from his brooding vigil. She arrived cloaked in morning black, her features hidden beneath a gauzy veil. Her name, she claimed, was Miss Sibylla Trent, a dramaturge formerly employed by the Lyceum. Her hands trembled as she unfolded a note which had been pinned to her door the night before. "He returns, cloaked in firelight. The performance is not yet finished. The curtain shall fall when the last line is spoken." Holmes read the note aloud, his eyes gleaming with sudden clarity. The language is theatrical but unmistakable. A message from the remnants of the mask. Miss Trent then revealed that she had once attended private readings at Lord Marbury's estate, exclusive gatherings where anonymous dramatists read new plays. She had even met a man named Dorian Quill, a peculiar playwright who wore gloves at all times and recited his lines as if possessed. "Quill," Holmes repeated, as if tasting the name. "A nom de guerre, perhaps." He claimed to have studied at the Conservatoire in Paris, she said, but his accent was clearly not French. Holmes looked to me. Dorian Quill may be our link to the surviving cell. If he continues to orchestrate performances, then we must find his next venue. That evening, disguised as theater patrons, Holmes and I attended a peculiar invitation-only performance in the basement of an abandoned manor near the Thames. The show, titled The Veil and the Visage, bore all the hallmarks of the mask: surreal dialogue, ominous monologues, and actors in ivory masks who never spoke their real names. Holmes took copious notes during the performance. Midway through the final act, one line caused him to stiffen in his seat. "When the bell tolls 12 at Wyndham's Gate, the past shall rise from ash and paint the stage anew." "That is no stage direction," he whispered. "It's a rendezvous." The following night, at the stroke of 12, we stood in the alley behind Wyndham's Theatre. There, beneath a loose cobblestone, Holmes found a satchel containing parchment scrolls, floor plans, coded messages, and a list of names, several of whom were known to have perished in accidents over the past year. "Quill is planning another staging," Holmes said grimly, "but this one shall not end with applause." We returned to Baker Street in the early hours. The scrolls from Wyndham's Alley unfurled across Holmes's desk, like the map of a battlefield. The names, scrawled in a careful but erratic hand, were chilling in their familiarity. Several were actors who had disappeared during rehearsals or between engagements. One, however, stood out. "Winifred Hale," I murmured. "Wasn't she presumed drowned last spring after falling from the Westminster Bridge?" Holmes nodded grimly. "That was the official story, but I never accepted it. Her body was never recovered, and the reports were sanitized." He tapped her name with his long forefinger. She was a mimic of rare talent. If someone were constructing a theater company built on illusion and manipulation, she would be of great use. "But for what purpose?" I asked. "What do they hope to achieve now that Marbury is in custody?" "Legacy, perhaps," Holmes said. "Or vengeance. A man like Marbury, especially under a pseudonym like Aurelius, does not lead alone. The mask may have been a collective. Cut off one head and another takes its place." He moved next to the theater blueprints that had been rolled among the documents. "These floor plans are not of Wyndham's," he said slowly, "nor the Haymarket. They're of the Duke's Theater, the one condemned after the fire of 1879. I frowned. "That place hasn't opened its doors in years." "Which makes it the perfect venue," Holmes said. "Deserted, forgotten, and situated deep in the theater district. If the mask intends one final act, it will be there." The next evening found us navigating the desolate shell of the Duke's Theater. Its once glorious archways sagged with damp rot, and ivy crept through cracked stone as if trying to smother the structure. Holmes found a rusted service door and with his usual deftness, picked the lock. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and memory. The scent of dust and soot clung to the velvet curtains, and broken chandeliers dangled like skeletal remains from the ceiling. Holmes's lantern cast long, stretching shadows across the warped wooden floor of the stage. Suddenly, a soft sound, barely more than breath, echoed through the auditorium. We froze. From behind the stage curtain emerged a figure cloaked in gray, face hidden behind the same porcelain mask we had seen in The Veil and the Visage. In his hand, he held a battered script. He raised it and spoke in a low, tremulous tone. "The play is not done. Aurelius may have fallen, but his chorus shall sing still." "Remove your mask," Holmes commanded, stepping forward. The figure hesitated. Then, slowly, he lifted it. Beneath the mask was a young man, barely 20, gaunt from hunger or opium, with dark-ringed eyes full of a feverish light. "They call me Silas," he whispered. "I am the archivist." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You were at Marbury's readings." "I was the one who preserved the plays," Silas said. "Who wrote them anew, gave them voice when others forgot. They would have burned them all if not for me. Aurelius trusted me." "Where is Dorian Quill?" Holmes asked. Silas's expression changed. "He's dead. Took poison the night Marbury was arrested. He believed without the maestro, the opera could never begin." "And you," Holmes said, "are you content to inherit a legacy of manipulation and murder?" Silas lowered the script. "I came only to bury the last pages. No more plays. No more masks. The mask is finished." He turned and vanished behind the curtain before we could stop him. When Holmes rushed to the wings, Silas was gone. Only the script remained, lying on the boards. Holmes picked it up. The final page bore one line, written in blood-red ink: "The curtain falls when the watcher walks away." Back at Baker Street, as dawn broke over the city, Holmes burned the script in the fireplace without a word. We stood in silence until only ash remained. "Is it over?" I asked quietly. Holmes's gaze remained fixed on the flames. "For now. But the theater is never empty for long. The world craves illusion, Watson, and someone will always step forward to wear the mask." He turned to me, eyes dark with memory. "But next time, we'll be waiting." Chapter 12, The Final Masquerade. The days following our encounter at the Duke's Theater were marked by a stillness that was almost sinister in its quietude. Holmes, though outwardly composed, moved with a certain tension beneath his skin. The destruction of the final script had not satisfied his instincts, nor had the ambiguous disappearance of the archivist. The mask, even if diminished, left a residue of uncertainty too acrid to ignore. Then, as if on cue, the storm broke. It came in the form of an unsigned envelope left on our doorstep in the early morning hours, its contents a single playing card, the Queen of Spades. On its reverse was a line in ornate script: "One final curtain, one last breath, the mask lives." Holmes stared at the card for a long moment. "A calling card," he said, "but also an invitation." "To what?" I asked. He turned to me. "To the final performance." The card was not mere bravado. Its ornate ink was traced with a rare dye used only in bespoke stationery sold by a boutique in Mayfair. Holmes and I visited the establishment under the guise of wealthy collectors. After a delicate exchange with the proprietor, whom Holmes overwhelmed with a mix of deduction and insinuation, we learned the cards were sold in a bulk order to an alias, Mr. Nadir Leontis. A false name, of course, but one that traced back through a web of theatrical guilds, finally landing us at the Royal Phantasm, a defunct opera house repurposed as a storage space for the city's costume companies. The building stood shrouded in mist and ivy, its iron gates long rusted shut, yet someone had recently oiled the hinges. We waited until nightfall to return. Inside, the Royal Phantasm was a cathedral of shadows. Shafts of moonlight slanted through the broken dome, casting spectral patterns across the dust-strewn floor. Mannequins stood like frozen sentinels in a hall of discarded finery. Then, faintly, we heard it, the sound of a piano. We followed the notes down a corridor, descending deeper into the undercroft. The music guided us to a small stage hidden behind heavy curtains, where a lone figure played by candlelight. The man wore a half-mask of ivory and black. Holmes stepped forward. "You must be Leontis." The pianist ceased his playing, but did not turn. "That name has outlived its usefulness," he said, "but for your purposes, it shall suffice." He stood, and as he did, a row of sconces ignited, revealing a circle of masked performers seated silently in the shadows. They did not move, nor acknowledge us. "I suppose this is the final act," Holmes said. Leontes gave a theatrical bow. "An epilogue, perhaps, the last song of a dying troupe." He stepped toward us, candlelight dancing across the mask. "You've dismantled the mask, Mr. Holmes. You've ruined our patrons, exposed our benefactors, and shattered the illusion. But theater, true theater, cannot die. It is in every whisper of ambition, every lie spoken with conviction." "You killed men," Holmes said coldly, "terrorized the city for your games." "And what is society but a stage for such games?" Leontis retorted. "We merely stripped away the velvet curtain." I stepped beside Holmes. "This ends tonight," Leontis chuckled. "Yes, it does." He raised his hand, and the masked figures rose in unison. But Holmes was faster. In one smooth motion, he drew a whistle from his coat and blew sharply. From behind us, the door crashed open. Scotland Yard poured into the chamber, Lestrade at the head. Within moments, the circle of performers was subdued. Leontis, expression blank beneath his mask, allowed himself to be shackled without resistance. Holmes approached him one final time. "Why go through with this farce?" he asked. Leontis's voice was a whisper. "Because I wanted an audience when I fell." The mask was disbanded. The truth spilled into the public sphere over the following weeks. A network of actors and playwrights who had used theater as a cover for manipulation, blackmail, and, in some cases, murder. Their legacy, long rooted in the darkest alleys of art and ambition, crumbled under the weight of its exposure. Sibylla Trent was exonerated and resumed her career, though she never again wrote of ghosts or veiled figures. Silas, the archivist, was never found. As for Holmes, he returned to his quietude, but with a heavier gaze. The theater, he said, had always been a mirror of society. What we had faced was not merely a criminal ring, but the reflection of something more unsettling. The human appetite for illusion, he told me one evening, is stronger than its thirst for truth. We chase shadows because they are easier to believe than substance. He turned back to his violin then, and for the first time in weeks, the music returned. In the aftermath of the Royal Phantasm raid, London seemed to exhale. The newspapers, ever hungry for spectacle, spun tales of the secret society that had lurked behind the curtain. Some likened it to a cult, others to a network of anarchists. Holmes, of course, gave no interviews. He let the fictions parade down Fleet Street without correction. We were seated by the fire 2 nights later, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing, when I finally broke the silence. "Do you believe it's truly over?" Holmes stirred his tea without tasting it. The mask as an organization has been dismantled, but the motivations that birthed it, vanity, vengeance, the hunger to control perception, those remain. I leaned forward. "You suspect a survivor?" "I suspect the idea persists," Holmes said. Leontes played the final act to perfection, but even he admitted that theater does not die, it transforms. What we uncovered was one incarnation. I nodded slowly, but my mind lingered on Silas, the archivist, and the whisper of footsteps in the tunnels that had never been explained. Then, as if conjured by thought alone, a letter arrived the next morning. No envelope. Simply folded parchment, tied in red thread, delivered by a page boy who claimed no sender. Holmes opened it with a scalpel as though performing a dissection. Inside was a single sentence. "The script may burn, but the audience remains." There was no signature, but at the bottom corner in the faintest ink was the silhouette of a stage mask, half comedy, half tragedy. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A copycat?" "Or a warning," I said. He looked up. "Then we must take it seriously. Begin watching the theaters again. Quietly. Focus on any new troupes performing obscure works, especially those featuring masked characters." I frowned. "Holmes, this can't go on indefinitely." He folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer, alongside other tokens from cases unresolved. "No," he said, "but for now the stage is quiet. Let us listen to the silence, and be ready when the curtain rises again." Chapter 13, the final act. The evening air was thick with anticipation and fog as Holmes and I made our way to the site of the ruined theater, once the famed Lyceum, now little more than charred timbers and crumbling stone. The city seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for some final revelation to spill forth from the ashes. The Watcher's Wake was set to open here, and the invitation was unspoken yet unmistakable. Holmes moved with a peculiar energy, his keen eyes scanning every shadow, every whisper of movement beyond the ruins. "This production," he mused, "is no mere play. It is a summons. Someone wishes to cast the final scene, this time with an audience unable to look away." As we entered the perimeter, a faint glow emanated from a hastily erected stage, framed by makeshift scaffolding and heavy drapes, patched from the remnants of old curtains. Actors in masks moved silently, rehearsing lines under the flicker of gas lamps. Among them, a figure caught my eye. Tall, lean, with eyes sharp and calculating beneath a cloak that shimmered like smoke. Silas, alive and unmistakably present, his voice, low and compelling, carried through the night air as he instructed the troupe with deliberate precision. Holmes watched him intently. The archivist's survival was no mere chance. He's been orchestrating this all along. The mask was but a prelude. The final tableau demands more than whispers and shadows. Suddenly, a harsh cry shattered the quiet. One of the masked actors collapsed, clutching a bloodied hand. The cause was unclear, but the tension rippled instantly through the troupe. Holmes signaled for quiet, and with a swift motion, approached Silas. "You've staged quite a spectacle," Holmes remarked, voice low. Silas's eyes gleamed with a mixture of admiration and menace. "The theater is a mirror, Holmes. Tonight, the audience will see the reflection of truth, no matter how unsettling." The performance commenced with an eerie beauty. The play unfolded as a ghost story intertwined with betrayal, revenge, and the search for redemption. But with each act, the boundary between fiction and reality blurred. The actors' masks seemed to shift, revealing glimpses of real faces scarred by secrets. As Holmes predicted, This was no ordinary play. Hidden among the allegories were clues, coded references to blackmail, betrayals among the city's elite, and the tangled web that had ensnared the original actor, Harold Gray. At the climax, Silas appeared on stage, removing his mask to reveal his true identity to the assembled crowd of insiders and curious spectators who had been drawn like moths. His voice rang clear and accusatory. Tonight, I expose the sins hidden behind the velvet curtain, not just mine, but those of the man who sought to silence me, Harold Gray's murderer. Holmes stood at the edge of the stage, his gaze fixed on the circle of faces now paling with shock and fear. "The director, Mr. Carlyle," he whispered to me. "His revenge runs deeper than we imagined." Suddenly, the lighting dimmed, and a trapdoor swung open beneath the stage. Holmes sprang forward, but not before the director, a grim man with eyes like steel, leapt through the aperture, escaping into the labyrinth below. The theater erupted into chaos as the truth spilled forth, leaving those gathered to grapple with the devastation of betrayal and the very human cost of vanity and vengeance. The manhunt for Carlyle was swift, but not immediate. Holmes and I spent long hours in the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the ruins, piecing together the director's plan, a meticulous scheme to use the theater's collapse as cover for murder, orchestrating an elaborate blackmail ring and hiding the bodies of victims beneath the stage. Holmes's final deduction came with quiet clarity. Carlyle was driven by ruined pride. The actor's scandal threatened his career and his honor. The ghost was his design, the mask his shield. In the final confrontation, Carlyle was cornered, his mask stripped away to reveal a man broken by obsession. His confession was chillingly matter-of-fact, devoid of remorse. As he was taken into custody, Holmes turned to me, voice somber. "Theater is a grand illusion, Watson, but behind every mask is a man, capable of greatness and cruelty alike. Tonight we witnessed the tragedy of both." The city slowly healed from the scars of the mask and the bewitched theater, but the echo of that final act lingered long in my mind, an eternal reminder of the fine line between art and deceit. Holmes resumed his quiet routine at Baker Street, though I could see in his eyes the flicker of a restless mind, already seeking the next mystery hiding beneath the fog. Epilogue. The London fog rolled in thicker than ever the night I sat by the window at 221B Baker Street, Holmes quietly tuning his violin in the background. The city outside seemed unaware of the dramas we had unraveled, the secrets whispered behind closed doors, and the masks removed in the dead of night. Holmes spoke softly, his gaze distant. "The theater, Watson, is but a reflection of our hopes, our fears, and our darkest desires. We chase illusions not merely on stage, but in life." I nodded, pondering the many faces we had seen, the roles played, and the fragile line between truth and performance. "Do you think it's truly over?" He paused, then smiled faintly. "In this game, Watson, the curtain may fall for one player, but the theater itself never closes. There are always new acts, new players. The shadows endure." Outside, a lone carriage rattled down the cobblestones, a reminder that the city's stories never cease. I knew that whatever mysteries awaited us next, Holmes and I would be there, watching, listening, and ready to unveil the truth beneath the masks. For now, the final bow was taken, but the play, as ever, went on. Thank you so much for listening to our Honoring Audiobooks original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.